Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you, all of you, for joining us for this important workshop. Our colleagues from Fort Lauderdale and all of you out there, and I think there's some overflow as well. Obviously, a lot of interest in this issue. I want to especially thank Mayor Trentalis and Vice Mayor Pittman and the other Fort Lauderdale commissioners who agreed to hold this workshop and for adjusting their schedules and plans to be able to join us here today. Just wanted to suggest that anyone who is going to speak, please remember to turn on your mic and speak into the mic. I'm guilty of that sometimes because we had some issues this morning with that not happening. And also, if you could mute your phones, that would also be helpful. Thank you. We have a rather limited time to cover a very complex subject. So I'm going to make some brief opening remarks, and then I want to also give Mayor Trentalis the opportunity to also make some opening remarks, and then we will dive into today's agenda. First and foremost, collaboration is the key. For those of you who may not have heard, my mayoral theme this year is collaboration, community collaboration, achieving more together. This joint workshop reflects both the county and the city's commitment to work together to define solutions to transportation and other key needs in our communities. On behalf of the county, I want to reiterate our commitment to working collaboratively and receiving input from leaders of Fort Lauderdale and from other cities and organizations with a stake in planning for the future of our region. This is especially true when it comes to commuter rail and other regional transportation investments that the county is leading. We need all stakeholders to work with us and help us succeed in providing a regional commuter rail system to serve Broward County residents and visitors. Secondly, I don't need to remind anyone here, I don't think, that time is of the essence. We have been talking about developing commuter rail on the FEC corridor. I think the one figure that was given to me was at least for 20 years. We finally need to bring commuter rail to Broward. We currently have a pro-rail administration in Washington and a recently passed Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that provides a window of opportunity to leverage federal funding. Development around the anticipated rail stations, it's important that we have transit-oriented development. Affordable housing, the workshop we had this morning, is one of the major opportunities within this context, and the subject of our previous county workshop, as I mentioned. Every day we wait to move forward, we increase the risk of missing out on funding and economic development opportunities, not to mention the fact that traffic congestion continues to worsen in the absence of new public transit systems, and construction costs continue to rise. Finally, let me take time. Let's take the time today to learn about the findings of this joint study and use the information to guide our decisions going forward. We agreed at the beginning of the year to jointly plan, fund, and execute this in-depth study. We now have an important opportunity to benefit from that work. I look forward to today's presentations and to a productive workshop with you all.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to echo the sentiments that have been expressed by newly elected Nan Rich. Mayor, congratulations.
Thank you.
I think that today's workshop is going to be crucial and pivotal as we move forward in trying to make decisions regarding the commuter rail service. Commuter rail has been discussed for quite a few years, even predating my early election back in 2003 to the City Commission of Fort Lauderdale. It's gone back that far. Back then, it was considered a pipe dream, a pie in the sky kind of undertaking, thinking that we could have commuter rail up and down the corridor between Miami and West Palm Beach. it's important for us to recognize what are the benefits that we would try to achieve with a commuter rail service between those locations. Mayor Rich pointed out economic development. And economic development is an important aspect of this, hoping to encourage people to live along the rail line and to also encourage investors to want to invest in an area where commuter rail service is available. But at the same time, we don't want to create an infrastructure that would enhance the commuter rail system, but at the same time depress economic development. In Fort Lauderdale, for example, we have a flourishing, robust economic activity going on in our downtown. Many of you have seen it in Flagler Village and south of the river. We have significant amount of investment, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars have been and will continue to be invested in our downtown area. So whatever we do with regard to this commuter rail program, we can't do anything that's going to depress that economic activity, interfere with its growth, or in any way diminish its value as it's currently been built. In addition, we have to also consider what the enhancements are for travelers, people who are visitors, commuters in and out of our city, commuters that would come through our city. We have a number of opportunities here that have been created through the Brightline system that we currently experience between Miami and Orlando. And it's been very robust and very successful now that most of those stations have been open, especially since Boca and Aventura have also been open. And we've seen the impact it's had. We see how people are taking the trains, and we see that we've just sort of made a dent in the opportunities that we have going forward. But I also want to point out that a lot of the travelers that come to and from Fort Lauderdale in particular, we have to ask ourselves, where does a commuter rail service benefit the city of Fort Lauderdale? Perhaps holistically and regionally, we see the opportunities of taking cars off the road of 95, the Interstate 95, and how a train system that runs parallel with that transportation system might help to alleviate the traffic congestion. But from a city point of view, we have to ask ourselves, where does that leave Fort Lauderdale? Are we taking cars off the road coming in and out of the city of Fort Lauderdale? And how does this new commuter rail service affect the amount of traffic coming in and out of our city? Especially much of the commuter rail that comes in and out of our city is east-west, not north-south. So these are issues that we want to address, and we want to continue to make sure that we make accommodations for as we try to consider a regional transportation system such as we're discussing today through this commuter rail system. Now, I do want to point out a couple of things. Economic activity is important. It's not just real estate development. We have a very robust and pivotal industry here called the marine industries. It generates billions of dollars of economic activity in our community, and we can do nothing to negatively impact it. If anything, we should look for ways to enhance it more and more. The city of Fort Lauderdale continues to find opportunities to increase dock space and marine service activity because we are the marine capital of the world, and we want to continue to make it that way. So in our discussions, we have to look for opportunities to assist the marine industries and not try to frustrate the kind of business activity that they have developed over the many decades here in our community. So having said that, I hand it back to our Mayor, Nan Rich, and let's begin the discussion.
Okay, thank you. I would first like to introduce our County Administrator, Monica Sapero, and ask her for any brief remarks she'd like to make.
Thank you, Mayor and Mayor Trincalis. So this study, as you all know, has been a long time coming. Our team began reaching out to all of our colleagues across the street of the city of Fort Lauderdale, even before the County Commission passed the resolution back in September of 2022, directing us to collaborate and jointly plan, fund, and execute a joint study and work towards consensus. So even back then, many stakeholders were extremely anxious to get the ball rolling, and were not happy when they learned that we had agreed to make one last effort at reviewing the options and better understand technical and financial considerations. It was the will of this board to work collaboratively, and I think what you have before you demonstrates that. You will hear from our team shortly about how we got to where we are today with this. So since that time, over a year has passed, and since then the pressure to make the decisions and move ahead has only become higher, as you all have heard from many out in the community. We've received many letters. In the last couple of days, even an influx of support for moving commuter rail along, which we distributed to all of you, including letters from the marine industry as well, a statement of support for commuter rail and how to also look at that. So it's important to the region. Time is of the essence, and honestly, one of the biggest linchpins here is a need for a cost-effective option to ensure the likelihood that this project will actually be completed and become a reality. Our residents and visitors want and deserve action, and we're all ultimately concerned if we don't act promptly that we'll miss out on a lot of grant funding and other opportunities. As I mentioned, and in closing from my remarks, Mayor, what I've heard from the county's perspective is, and from many in the industry, is that cost effectiveness is one of the most critical and paramount importance to Broward and to its residents, and we cannot lose sight of our need to ensure fiscal responsibility. At this point, Madam Mayor, I would like to turn the conversation over to Kevin Kelleher, Assistant County Administrator, who has served largely as point for these day-to-day issues on this project, to give a brief overview on the joint study of the New River crossing alternatives. Thank you, Kevin.
Good afternoon, Mayor Rich, Mayor Trentalis, and the respective boards. I'm going to do a brief overview of the joint study between the City of Fort Lauderdale and Broward County, how we got here today before we turn it over to the White House Group. So a little background in this history, and yes, the idea may have germinated 20 years ago, but in earnest about 4 years ago, in January 2020, through the legislature, the state of Florida, through the FDOT District 4, did a preliminary feasibility study that was done by Corradino and HDR. So this was the first study of that included how to cross the New River. Then in January 2021, about a year later, Broward County and FDOT signed an MOU to enter into the Broward Commuter Rail program and have a project development and environmental study. So that was initiated in January 2021 and completed in December of that year. In November of that year, there was because there was some thought that the costs from the initial feasibility study and the draft of the second study by Corradino and HDR were excessive with respect to tunnel costs. It was an independent review that was contracted for not by the local FDOT, but by their central office, and there was an independent review that was done, and that was done by WSP. In January 2022, the Fort Lauderdale City Commission adopted a resolution at that time urging FDOT to recommend the tunnel as a locally preferred alternative. In August of 22, the Broward Commission, came forward and approved the initial Broward Commuter Rail project for the southern portion, so it was BCR South, and started the federal fund process to go for the BCR South, which will take us from the Miami border, having a stop in Hollywood, the airport, and the northernmost terminus would be around the Broward Health 17th Street area, which was south of the New River. But at the same time, about a month later, the commission adopted a resolution directing the county administrator to work with the City of Fort Lauderdale and do a joint study of the New River crossing to once and for all try to get to a resolution on how to cross the New River. I'm going to go into detail as to how we got to it, but in March, there was a kickoff meeting that was held with the White House Group, and then in August, they completed their study. and that was completed by the White House Group and their team. And their study, the scope of work included identifying cost-saving opportunities, interviewing the operators, that would be Brightline, FEC, having capital costs, O&M, review the grant funding opportunities, NEPA, and having the timeframes for all this process. And the cost was split by both the county and the city. So how did we get to have White House Group? Once there was a determination for the parties to work together on this, it was about September, October of last year. City and county staff met. They worked together. They worked on a scope of work. They determined the most appropriate approach would be to go through the Broward MPO. They had a library of firms. The city of Fort Lauderdale had an existing agreement with the Broward MPO, and what we did is we tagged onto that, went through that city agreement, and assist and work with MPO for that process. That process resulted in the White House Group being selected, and the MPO, the city, and the county worked directly with each other on the selecting of the consultant as well as negotiating the task work order. An ILA was drafted up and signed by the city and county in February and March. And as I said before, the kickoff meeting began in March 13th at the city offices. There was biweekly meetings held during the study. There was 7 tasks that were part of the scope of work. Each deliverable was submitted to both the city and the county and approved by the city and county representatives, which were identified in the ILA. The draft final report was submitted to both the city and the county on July 27th, and then the final report, after receiving those comments, was submitted on August 18th. Subsequent to that, we had talked about having a joint meeting. Unfortunately, the city and the county's calendars couldn't work in the October timeframe. The county had a workshop on October 10th, and then there's been a couple of city meetings, I believe, on November 7th and November 21st that have now led us to this, where we're here today, where the White House Group is meeting and preparing to discuss with both the city and the county commissions together and present their joint studies and then have an active dialogue. And with that, I'd like to introduce the President and COO of White House Group, Todd Broward.
That's always so undignified when you have to lower it as low as I need to. Oh, and then it creaks while I do it. And then I put on my reading glasses. So it's just, oh, Kevin. Oh, gosh, if I'm not in the hot seat as it is. Wonderful. And Kevin, does this work then?
Yeah.
It does work. Okay, great. So I don't have to worry about that. Yeah, and thank you for the introduction. Mayor, thank you. Mayors, thank you so much for having us. My name is Todd Broward with White House Group. I've got a wonderful team with me here that's going to answer all of your questions. But the first place that I want to start today is with a high-level summary of about 450 pages of technical documentation that we produced for this study. And then we're going to go into the discussion. I want you to hear it directly from the mouth of our experts to answer your questions. I want them to be available to you. We will be available here as long as you need us to be. All right, so, Mike, you told me it was working. Here, I'll do this. It's fine. I'll just do it this way. All right. So this summary is designed a little bit like what you saw Kevin do, where he took you through the scope of services. You saw that there was an order to it. We tried to also create this in a way where you could see the critical path where we were able to be informed with how then the next piece of the work came forward. So this summary is very much designed exactly as we did the work itself. So that was really, and we call it our process of discovery, because in the end, that was what our job was discovery. So that way we could provide you the information, the elected body, to make decisions. That was our purpose, was to find the information, to collect it, to synergize it, and to put it in something meaningful where it was easy for you to be able to make decisions about this important project. So a little bit about the background, because the overall scope that we examined is just one element of a larger project. So when you're thinking about the new river crossing, it's one element of, just as everybody was talking, the extension of commuter rail to the north from the Broward Health Medical Center, going up north to the boundary. So those communities that would be north of Fort Lauderdale. This project is referenced in the county's Primo plan, and the alternatives to cross the New River, again, one portion of it, had been developed and established as our study area. So that was the magnifying, that was the lens that we were looking for. So we always had an image of a much larger project, the extension of commuter rail, but we were looking at 3 alternatives that were developed to cross the New River, 3 bridge and 1 tunnel. So with that, our scope included 6 tasks, and they did follow. Now, there were some things that we did in line with one another. We were able to do a couple of the tasks at the same time, but it has a logical flow to it. And each one of these tasks, though, required specialized expertise, and we brought those experts today with us to answer your questions. They're available to you. We start with Quandel Consultants, who is responsible for reviewing all the elements of the bridge alternatives, including cost-saving opportunities, inflationary impacts, and developing capital and O&M estimates for those 3 bridge alternatives. Jacobs was responsible for exactly the same effort, but with the tunnel. Clary then was tasked with identifying funding opportunities to how you pay for it. So the order of it, though, was, as we talk about the collaboration being the theme, that is exactly how we looked at it. This was a collaborative effort with you all staff, but also with the team, because the first place that we started, as you'll notice with task 1, is conducting that overview, reviewing all the information, reviewing the designs, looking for those cost-saving opportunities, but also being aware that a lot had changed since the study had been done. Inflation had boomed, we know, during the summer of 2022, so there were a lot of things that we had to look at. But we got that flow where we were able to communicate together as a team, ask questions about the design, start to understand what the cost savings options were, and then engage the actual owner of the asset. So Brightline Fortress, which owns the access rights to the physical asset, which is owned by FECR, or the Florida Railroad, Florida East Coast Railroad. Its reporting mark is FEC. So when you see us going between the two, sometimes we're using the Federal Railroad Administration code for that. That's FEC. So not to get confused there. But ultimately, then, once we had a sense of these are the cost savings that we're looking at, let's hear what the owner had to say related to it, and then build our cost estimates from there. And then how would we pay for it? What are the options to bring money into looking at each one of these alternatives? And each one of these alternatives, it is important to note, we looked at with the same amount, with the same microscope as all of them. So our scope did not include developing new alternatives, nor did it have recommending an alternative. This was a fact-finding mission and updating and estimating cost estimates for both capital as well as O&M. And then our job was to synthesize all of it, to put it in plain speak, to get it into terminology that you could look at. Now, because no offense against my technical team here, but we talk all the time. They're very much thinking like an engineer, and thank you for doing that. But sometimes to be able to then translate that into action, into political action, we then look at that information and synergize in a certain way. So that's what White House Group's job was. So you had Quandel, who was doing the bridges, Jacobs, who was doing the tunnel, Clary, who was looking at funding and financing options, and then White House Group that was looking at the NEPA expert, we have the NEPA expert here, but NEPA, what's the impact of the federal process related to it, and then bringing all those together. So these alternatives, these 4 that were developed, they were developed, and Kevin gave you a quick overview of it. They were developed as related to a previous process that included public engagement, that included evaluation. There was a lot of work that went into these 4 alternatives. We were asked to review them. We were looking for cost savings. We were looking at the design to say, where could we save money? Where are there maybe escalations? And then the estimation of the actual cost. And not just in today's dollars, but looking at it as year of expenditure. Because obviously a candy bar today does not cost the same as it did 10 years ago. Even if we look at the Miami Tunnel that was completed in 2014, that cost would look something very different. So we wanted to give you a better accurate picture of what would it look like if we took it out to the year of expenditure. And then importantly, how do these alternatives impact the larger project, which is commuter rail to the north, in establishing the ability to get federal funding? These programs are very competitive. So all of those things went into play when we looked at these alternatives. So once we got a sense of what the cost savings were, well, our team of engineers and specialists, they have their ideas, but so do the actual owners of the asset. So we interviewed Brightline, we interviewed FEC, and we asked them about the cost-saving opportunities, different techniques that we could use. We also asked them about each one of the alternatives, what their thoughts were, what did they see as challenges, what did we need to be aware of, because we're now finally getting everybody on the same page talking, and again, with the actual owner of the asset. So that was the engagement that we had with them to understand it. So we did it with both Brightline and FEC. And with that, then, we were able to create our estimates. So we got a sense of all the opportunities that we were looking at to also understand cost escalation. Then at the same time, though, it was very important for us to understand what is the operator, the owners of the asset. They gave us direction there. That then culminated in the estimates that you see before you. These estimates were developed at a Class 4 international standard of accuracy. So we're not looking at just back of the napkin. This actually has an industry standard that we had to follow, which we did. And that was part of the approved scope of work, which I have to thank both the city and the county for giving us a scope that had very clear direction about what the level of accuracy was that you were looking for. All the cost estimates, again, are in that year of expenditure. So when you're looking at this, you're looking at the capital costs and the O&M costs for each one of the alternatives. All right. The more expensive an alternative, the more difficult it is to get federal funding. And primarily, again, because we're looking at the entire project, we're not talking about the new river crossing, we're actually talking about the extension of Broward County Rail all the way up to its northern border. So not only does it become more difficult, but you also now have higher degree of scrutiny when you put together your applications. So we have to look at all of those things because these are incredibly competitive programs. And I know some of you have already heard me talk about, what's the highest award that's been given? What's the average award? For Mega, we're looking, the last cycle was $130 million. And you saw that Raise This came out, its cap is $25 million. Infra, I believe what is it, Lowell? It is 100 and that's about the highest level? Okay, so $100 million. So we see that we got some real challenges to be able to fill the gap for funding these projects. Thank you, Lowell. Well, with federal money comes strings, right? Somebody's going to write a check. They're going to have a say about it. So USDOT requires a process to look in detail at the project and understand its impacts on the human, the built, the natural environment. It includes additional public outreach. It includes evaluation of a no-build alternative. The result is a federal finding. So they're basing it off of local information, but they're actually the ones that do the finding related to it. So that's the process that would be required should you choose to go the federal route. And it can be up to 2 years, extending the life of the project to be able to move it forward. So with that, we put together a summary so you could look at them side by side to understand each one of them, the costs, what the funding options are, what the Brightline and FEC perspectives are, and then a rough order of magnitude on the project delivery time frame too. So that way you kind of got a sense of how far out are we looking at to develop something. We also put together something that was more illustrative, so that way you could see how do each one of the alternatives fit with the overall project and what the project sponsor would need to do to move these forward. And the more complex it gets, the greater the time frame becomes. So that's how the interaction with the alternative and the larger project work together. So with that, I've got the subject matter experts. So I have Jeff, who is the Director of Structural Engineering. If you'd raise your hand, stand up. He's with Quandel. He can answer all your questions on the bridge alternatives. For the tunnel, I have Brandy Creed, who is Jacob's local liaison. She's a rail engineer. And I'm very excited about this. Nick Chen, who is joining us, who is the engineer of record for the Miami Tunnel. So this is the individual that signed and sealed those plans for the Miami Tunnel. He's the only living one to do that in 50 years. So it's not conjecture. When he was working on this project, it's from Florida experience in developing a project and a tunnel. So he can talk about his experience as well. And then we also have Ben, who is also here. He is the national estimator, transportation estimator for Jacob. So he looks at this on a national scale. He's responsible for looking at the accuracy of it to make sure that it's hitting the Class 4 requirement. And then Lowell, who is here to talk about grant opportunities. You probably know him. He's been involved with Florida for some time. He was FDOT CEO. He's been involved with funding on many levels. In fact, I think even Sunrail, you were involved in that one as well. So he has real-world experience in developing commuter rail within Florida. Also, I have Wade White, who is our NEPA expert. So he and I, actually, Wade was our project manager. One of the first projects that we won at White House Group was an FTA New Starts reviewer. He was our project manager for that, so he knows the CIG process and he knows NEPA quite well. So that is the team of experts that you have ready for you, ready to answer your questions, and ready to roll up their sleeves and get to work. Mayors?
The procedure right now is I'm going to defer to our guests to have their folks ask questions first.
So,
and
Mayor,
comments.
did you not, your previous workshop, did you already have this presentation when we were not there? Did you already make this presentation to the county?
Most of it. There were a couple adjustments that we made because there was questions about who had done what on the study itself. But the basis of it, it's exactly the same as what they had seen. Yes.
Okay. All right.
So
All
we're
right.
going to let me just answer Senator Geller's questions. So we're going to defer to our guests, let them ask questions, and then we'll move to our members. Okay.
All right, great. Thank you, Mayor. If it's okay, let me just start out, and then I'll defer to each of you if you have additional questions. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time today and being part of this program. I think that when the mayor and I both made our opening remarks, the intent is before the end of the day, let's hope that we can come to some kind of conclusion to be able to bring this project forward. So originally when this project was first discussed, the idea of a commuter rail service, the idea of bringing it through Fort Lauderdale just didn't seem to be that complicated until we started realizing the impact it would have on our downtown. And it was at that time, under the previous county administrator, in which we had conversations regarding bridge versus tunnel. In fact, tunnel wasn't even discussed, it was just bridge. At that time, I realized that the bridge alternative is going to be very complicated to implement within a flourishing downtown, which already has a significant amount of investment taking place, and which also I found and others found that the construction of a bridge through the middle of this development area would have negative impact. But we'll get to that in just a moment. I just want to ask a few questions regarding the study. So regarding the bridge versus tunnel study, I noticed that there were 3 bridge alternatives studied and only 1 tunnel alternative. And that tunnel alternative talked about a 3.5-mile tunnel. Can we not interrupt what's going on here right now?
Thank you. No, that's us. We don't need to.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, all right.
Okay, let's look at
okay. All right, let's go.
Okay.
So originally when this new river crossing was discussed, okay, but originally when this new river crossing was discussed, it was at that time that I realized that the bridge alternative was really the focus of what the county had wanted and what FDOT had wanted. So when I introduced the idea of a tunnel, we tried to consider not just the opportunity that a tunnel would have to facilitate the commuter rail service, but also how it would positively impact the already existing commuters traffic going east-west, vehicular traffic. It was at that time that I suggested for conversation purpose at the beginning, like what if we brought the tunnel under Sunrise Boulevard and brought it under Davie Boulevard? So we had a tunnel that would go from north to south in that distance. If you measure the distance between Sunrise Boulevard and Davie Boulevard, it's 2.2 miles. So I'm not quite sure where the extra mile and a quarter came from. And I think that certainly adds significantly to the cost of construction because it's almost a third more than what was originally contemplated. So I bring that up mainly because multiple lengths could still be contemplated. It doesn't necessarily have to be the distance between Sunrise and Davie. And why we ever got to 3.5 miles, I have no idea where that came from. I don't even think it was contemplated originally by FDOT, but be that as it may, I think that needs to be understood that the city of Fort Lauderdale never contemplated a 3.5 mile tunnel. It was only between Sunrise and Davie, which is 2.25 miles. Furthermore, I think it would add to the conversation in a very supportive way, just to perhaps contemplate alternative distances for the tunnel. If the 2 mile tunnel is too expensive and too long, we should consider a smaller tunnel, maybe 1.5 miles. The opportunity here is not just about tunnel versus bridge. It's about also contemplating how it's going to impact our downtown. We have a significant amount of vehicular traffic that is going to be impacted by 60 to 80 new trains a day that are going to frustrate traffic that's going to take place in our downtown. And that becomes a big issue for us. Now, we talked about the marine industry. And the marine industry is also part of this conversation. It's also part of the east-west traffic. The marine industry is the lifeblood of my city and of the region. And we have to consider whatever alternative that we decide to cross the New River, that we cannot do anything to frustrate that industry, that economy. It's not just about the boat show. It's about a 12-month out of the year operation that we as a city have to consider in terms of trying to ensure that industry maintains its vitality. There are a lot of things that your report talks about. One of the things I want to bring up is I want to clarify a couple of things. Monica, you published an op-ed piece, which I want to just bring up a couple of points, which I want to be sure that we're all on the same page here. Now, there are a couple of statements here that maybe, Todd, you can clarify for us if you could.
On Monica's letter?
Well, she makes references to your study, so I just want to make sure that we're clear.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I understood.
Yeah, I understand that. Okay. According to the White House group, who authored the most recent joint city-county study, the FECR indicated that a tunnel would be unsuitable for them. Now, FECR is the freight line, correct?
Correct.
All right. They've never indicated they wanted any change from what their existing operations were. So not only is the tunnel unsuitable for them, but so is a bridge. They don't intend to do anything to change their existing operations. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So when the statement was made that FECR indicated the tunnel would be unsuitable for them, so would a bridge.
Yes, with one caveat, but let's continue.
What is the caveat?
So one of the things that the team looked at from the standpoint of feasibility and looking at cost possibilities, there was something that Quandel was able to discover where you could split the two bridges and do flanking bascule bridges, so you could not disrupt them and still be able to meet either one of the heights. Because I think what's very important, though, Mayor, too, to realize is that this team did not look at it as tunnel versus bridge. All four alternatives are an option. No, neither of them are versus the other. They're just different alternatives.
I understand.
So what they were able to find is that they could work off of any of those heights with the bascule bridges, 56 or 25, basically flanking it, because one of the most important things that FEC told us was do not disrupt our operations. So we were able to find a solution looking at bascule bridges that did that.
Right, but the last representation that they made, FECR made, was that they don't want any of their operations interfered with, and they don't intend to. They don't intend to navigate their trains over a bridge, is what they had indicated to us.
Correct, but the flanking bridges actually allow you to then solve the passenger rail by having them flanking.
I'm not disputing that. I'm just talking about FECR right now.
Okay.
I'm not talking about passenger rail.
Yeah, so it leaves their operation intact.
Correct. Okay. It says other active participants in this years-long debate include all the municipalities near FECR, the corridor, the Marine Industries Association, the Broward Workshop, the Downtown Development Authority, and numerous business and civic organizations, as well as commuters and visitors. While that statement is true, it suggests that they support the bridge alternative. And as you know, and as I have here in front of me, I have letters of support on behalf of each one of those organizations for the tunnel. The tunnel is supported by the Broward Workshop, by the Greater Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance, as well as over 30 stakeholders of developers, neighborhood associations, and other civic organizations that opined on this issue. And all of them include anywhere from the neighborhood associations such as Flagler Village and Lake Ridge, developers such as Ossie Symbol and Jim Ellis, the Austin Foreman, Miles Foreman, George Hamberry, Steve Hudson, the list 3 dozen of them. Okay. The Downtown Development Authority, also in support of the tunnel approach. So a lot of what we talk about is, yes, we're going to talk about the fiscal aspects of it, bridge versus a tunnel, but there are aspects of this that go beyond just dollars and cents. It talks about impact on the communities and how that will change the whole dynamic of what we're trying to create downtown. I know that wasn't part of your study. I know that there are other studies that we're going to engage others to talk about that, including dividing communities. Fort Lauderdale has been a divided community for decades between those who live on each side of the tracks. We're trying to prevent and eliminate those divisions. So, and then there were a couple of other things that you talked about in your study. Quote, the new bascule bridge and approach spans would have to be constructed so far west of the existing bridge that the resulting impacts to the adjacent marina business and public facilities would be extensive and probably controversial. So that would have to do with the taking of land, would it not?
It would not necessarily be takings, because at this point, design, you wouldn't call it takings. You might look at impacted parcels, but the design isn't far enough along to actually know what the impact would be. So as the design matures, then you'll do value engineering and you'll look at those other options. So you could have a situation where you'd have no parcels impacted.
Okay, so you're saying that the bridge could be built without any taking of any property?
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the design isn't far enough along to know that answer.
So you wouldn't have included that in your cost estimate then?
It actually is part of a contingency.
Okay.
So you do consider the potential for impacted properties as part of the contingency, correct?
Okay, so you have a dollar figure for both the bridge?
We do. That is actually in our contingency.
Okay. Substantial right-of-way requirements beyond the FEC West property limits are required. Substantial. Further, in the 2-block stretch between the river and the existing Fort Lauderdale Brightline station, where Fort Lauderdale Historic District is located, the right-of-way needed would impact Southwest 2nd Avenue and access to businesses fronting the avenue, along with the Riverfront Marina, which is a new project, as well as the River Walk.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I just need clarification.
So again, substantial right-of-way acquirements are going to be considered. Is that not true?
So under the design as it is now, that is correct. That's where, again, our job is to look for cost savings, and that is what the Quandel team, in finding the flanking bridges, it removes that possibility.
Okay. Can I ask Mr. Chen a couple of questions? Can you come up to the podium? Mr. Chen, thank you for your good work in Miami.
Yeah, no problem.
Were you also involved in estimating the operating costs of that tunnel on an annual basis? Have you been involved in that at all?
Okay, not at the beginning, but eventually they asked me my opinion, and then that's the reason I look into the estimate, and then...
No, I'm talking about the Miami tunnel.
Oh, Miami tunnel, okay. The Jacob's involvement in the Port Miami tunnel, we are the part of the design build team. So we are the consultant to the contractor. So we are not really the engineer estimate for the owner. So that is a separate company.
That's a separate company.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So you were not involved. So right now you have no understanding as what the operating costs of that tunnel are today?
The operation, because it is a P3 project, all right? So there's a obviously a consortium to design, build, maintain, and operate the tunnel. So the O&M cost is just part of that the commissioning, the 35 years. So I don't know exactly the detail of the percentage of the O&M, right? Because of the concession.
Is anyone on your team, Todd, familiar with what the current operating costs are of the Miami tunnel? We're trying to get an understanding of how you came up with the $3 billion for operating a tunnel.
Okay, so we're going to bring Brandy up for that question, and then Ben is here as the estimator as well, so he's part of that process.
Mayor, my name is Brandy Creed with Jacobs. For the O&M cost that you see, it's a cumulative 50-year cost. The reason why it seems that high, not much higher than the bridge, is because there are a lot of fire suppression, there's ventilation, there are other systems that the tunnel includes, and that was included in the O&M cost. And it also includes the replacement of certain capital assets through the life of the tunnel during those 50 years. So that's where that cost came from.
Right, so you're estimating approximately $50 million a year to operate and maintain the tunnel.
I don't know if that's the average, but we did come up.
If you figure 50 into $3 billion, say it's $70 million. I mean, I want to know, that's a lot of money.
It is.
So you're telling us that that's a standard, and that's why I wanted to know what the operating and maintenance cost is for the Miami tunnel, since it's the exact same thing we're considering. It's a tunnel, and we want to know where you got your estimates from. What was your comparison? What local tunnel did you compare with? The only local tunnels there are in Florida happen to be right here. First of all, the Fort Lauderdale tunnel, which comes nowhere near that operation and maintenance cost, okay, and the Miami tunnel. So I want to know how you compared that and what was your standard that you used to make that comparison.
Yeah, we pulled information from average costs that we have in other projects currently for O&M. And that's where those numbers came from.
So nothing from locally from
Not
Miami?
Necessarily from Miami.
Or
correct.
from Fort Lauderdale?
Correct.
Okay. So we don't really know what the local costs would be. You just extrapolated from other projects somewhere else in the world, I guess?
That are current in the U.S.
In the U.S. Yes. Okay. All right. Good. So...
Mayor, can I answer one of your previous questions about the length of the tunnel?
Yes, sir.
The corridor,
can you talk into the microphone?
Yes. Okay. Apologize.
No problem.
The length of the tunnel, I think previously you quoted, say, is 3.5 miles. Now need to be clarified. The alignment for the tunnel is about 1.75 miles, but because it's twin bowl, right? So that's the reason you think it is a 3.5 because it's two tunnels. The total length, the total length of the tunnel is 3.5 miles, but actually the alignment crossing the New River is about 1.75 miles. So that's just a
I don't think I understand what you're saying.
Have one going each way. Each one is one.
So if you double 1.7 is 3.
Because you have two tunnels.
You have two. You have one going one way, one going the
Okay.
other.
Yeah, you have.
So
two.
that's where you come up with the 3.5.
That is the reason it's 3.5.
Okay.
Yeah, the
So
actual.
if you do a single bore tunnel, the cost would be less.
Yeah, it's 1.75.
So it would just be the cost of 1.7.
Yeah, probably. Okay, if you really try to compare the twin bore to single bore, all right, the single bore, the alignment will be a little bit greater than 1.75 mile. The reason, because the single bore, the tunnel is bigger. Then once you get into under the river, it will be deeper. So the length will be longer, a little bit.
Yeah, but he's also asking not just the length, the cost. The cost isn't the same between a double bore and a single bore.
Do you want to make a comparison?
Yeah, and actually, so the question would be, the mayor's, Nick has actually put together some information because he had put together, he was the engineer of record for Miami. He actually has some comparison information for you so you can see a single bore versus a double bore.
Okay.
If you'd like to see that.
Well, we have comparison information too, so I'll bring that up. I'll bring that up after your presentation. But
okay.
But basically, it was never a 3.5 mile tunnel. It was just two tunnels at 1.7 miles. Okay. Well, that helps clarify things because that was never really laid out here in the at least I didn't detect that. Okay. So thank you for clarifying that.
Mayor Trentalis, can we just get a point of information when you're asking your questions? When you're comparing a train tunnel with what we're proposing with what they're doing in Miami or what they have over here, which is not train, and you talked about operation and maintenance. I'm assuming that there's differences because you're putting a train through one and the others. Like I think the Miami tunnel, it's just vehicular.
Correct.
Don't they close that down under certain weather conditions in its entirety? I thought that there was some kind of difference.
All right. The Port Miami tunnel is a highway tunnel. Okay, so it's a highway tunnel. The length for the Port Miami tunnel is one way is about 4,000 feet. One way 4,000 feet, but you have two, right? Northbound, southbound. So you have two tubes. The inside diameter of the tunnel is 37 feet, so it's pretty big. That is very compatible, say, single bore to our double bore. And answer the highway tunnel question to the train tunnel, the difference, there are many things different, all right? One is a signal, all right? For a train, you have a signal, you have the, I would say, probably some section, you have to know where the train is, so you have a different signal, just make it very simple. The signal is different, but also the track bed, all right? You have a rail, you have, say, direct fixation, a block, and the highway tunnel does not have it. So when we try to compare the highway tunnel to this twin bore tunnel, then we need to add some additional cost, such as the signal communication and also the track bed. That's pretty different. But also this twin bore tunnel, I think the costs are presented by Todd, that including underground station. So the Port Miami tunnel does not have a station. So that is, I'm just trying to make some comparison if we try to make.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
So I'm going to defer now to, if it's okay, Mayor, defer to some of my commissioners. There are two commissioners whose district that this directly impacts. So we'll start with Commissioner Sturman. This directly impacts your district, and also you're an engineer, I understand.
Yes, and I'm on the MPO with you.
Yes.
First of all, I just want to make a couple statements. First of all, mayors, thank you so much for having us. I'm honored to be here with everybody. Number two, I do all things equal, the city of Fort Lauderdale truly would love to have a tunnel. That's our first, second, and third choice. If there's any way we could have a tunnel, that's something we would really want to have, but there's some issues that are coming up here, and I realize that our interest is subordinate to the county, so we have to, whatever we do, we have to work together, and that's going to be my number one focus, working with the county, whatever decision we have. We want the tunnel, but going forward, time is of the essence, and we have to come to a consensus, whatever we need to do to get this forward. That's not something we voted on. That's my personal feeling. I have a couple questions. And can I ask Phil at some point, or this is just for White House?
Oh, no.
Of DOT or a couple other people. While I'm
The
there.
MPO is also available.
Right, so if they want to. Am I missing something, or did we not talk about cost comparisons? Did we discuss
We
that?
haven't gone there yet. We haven't gone there yet.
Oh.
But you can bring it up.
You bring it up.
Oh, let's talk about cost comparisons. Well, I mean, that's like...
Well, we're trying to determine cost because while we were talking, someone sent to me information saying that the Miami tunnel, the maintenance cost for 30 years is $200 million.
Right. Lowell, I think you were looking up. Did that confirm the information that you had? Could you please repeat the comment?
So information that was given to me while we were talking was that the maintenance cost for the Miami tunnel over 30 years is $200 million.
Wait, over
you've
30 years or
30
what's
years,
been done so
30
far?
years, that's the estimate. So you indicated that over the 50 years it would cost $3 billion, which is a significant difference.
Yeah, Ben, our estimator, can answer that question.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope I can answer it. I think I just want to, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ben Kampf with Jacobs, the capital cost estimator. And I just wanted to shed some light on the difference or the discrepancy between O&M costs. I didn't prepare them, but if we're talking $200 million for the Port of Miami tunnel, it's probably, you have to have an apples-to-apples comparison. So that dollar figure is probably in the 2010, 2011 timeframe for a current dollar escalated to the year of expenditure. If we talk the $3 billion,
wouldn't we have 10 years worth of experience to corroborate whatever estimate that was? Wouldn't we have 10 years of experience, 12 years of experience to determine whether or not that figure could be corroborated?
Absolutely, and there are tunnel projects like this around the country that can be used for triangulation of these costs. The point I wanted to make is that the $3 billion in O&M costs is a future cost, and it's 25 years out, which is
it's 50
years out. So the midpoint of construction is, I don't know what that factor is, but the cost in current dollars is probably closer to $1 billion.
So what would be the cost of O&M for the bridge, any of the bridge designs then?
Do we know that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll turn it back.
Yeah, let me bring the slide back. Oh, and I've got, so that way you can see them compared with one another. Yep, so. Now, the other thing, too, that I want to point out, because, again, what's important in this conversation is it an apples-to-apples comparison? And I think that's what Ben was trying to point out, is what we were always trying to do was make sure that that's why we looked at year of expenditure. What are the dollars that you would actually spend, not based off of last year or this year, but 50 years in the future? That cost also, though, includes cyclical capital. So you're going to have to replace things, just like in the station Nick was mentioning. You're going to have to replace escalators. You're going to have to replace fire suppression. You're going to have to replace electrical. There's a lot of things that you are going to have to replace, ventilation, that you wouldn't on the bridge. That's some of the reasons why you're actually seeing the numbers as high as they are, is because the cyclical capital is very expensive on a tunnel.
Yeah, but wasn't also the life expectancy different as well? Wasn't the life expectancy estimated to be twice as much as a bridge? So if you, in 75 years, if you had to tear down the bridge to rebuild it, what are we looking at as a cost in 75 years? We're looking at tens of billions of dollars. So, I mean, let's be real. If we want to compare apples to apples, let's realize that the life expectancy of a tunnel is significantly more than that. You don't rebuild a tunnel. A tunnel is there. So bridges do come down, and they do have a life expectancy. And all the estimators, all the consultants, yours and ours, have estimated that the bridge has a shorter life expectancy than a tunnel. So in 75 years, if we're going to rebuild this rebuild this bridge, we're talking about money in 75 years from now, which is crazy.
Yeah, I just want to make one
please.
note. The O&M cost, I think Brandy mentioned, is purely a material cost, but actually there is a substantial cost in the labor, okay? Material, usually people think about, okay, I'm going to replace the fan, I'm going to replace these utilities, but actually there is a team constantly maintain the tunnel. And that's wherever you go to the O&M cost estimate for the tunnel, there will be some people. Okay, the cost of the people to maintain that tunnel probably is around the magnitude of about 20 people. So the salary of the 20 people, multiplied by 50 years, that is pretty significant. The majority of the cost, unless say every 10 years, 20 years, you have a major rehabilitation, but your labor. Don't forget about the labor. So sometimes if we say, okay, the O&M is this amount of money, need to think about it. Does it including the labor or not? So that's something we need to clarify.
Jeff, talk about the life expectancy.
Yeah, just one thing on the life expectancy of a bridge. I mean, everybody likes to say 75 years. Normally, on a highway bridge, we're replacing it in 75 years. But that, again, I'm from Chicago, so we got road salt, we got everything else. I have over my career thousands of railroad bridges. I still inspect 130-year-old railroad bridges with original steel that aren't falling down, and the railroad's not knocking on the door saying we got to replace it. So to put a number like 75 years, I mean, a railroad bridge that's carrying commuter rail, which is lighter than freight, and isn't going to have, it's not going to be 2-mile-long trains with, hundreds of 286 kip cars that are beating it to death. Kip just means 1,000 pounds, so 286,000-pound cars that are beating this bridge to death. It's commuter rail. So, what we're saying is 75 years is probably going to be more like 100, 125 years. And if we are making replacements, it's not the entire bridge. We're not, even the bridges we replace now, we're not replacing the piers, the substructure units, piers and abutments. We're maybe replacing the superstructure, the beams. You got salt there or whatever. I mean, that'll affect it. But as far as being billions of dollars, I mean, if you're building a bridge, for, say, the Bascule Bridge is $25 million now, it's not going to be $1 billion, I don't think, even in 30 years, 40 years.
Have you noticed around the country that cities are taking down their bridges and either doing subsurface or surface modes of transportation, or are you not seeing any of that?
I'm not seeing that in Chicago. I mean, I did design 3 tunnels. I did design 3 tunnels at O'Hare Airport, so I am familiar with tunnels, right. And I'm familiar with landing 1.25 million pound aircraft on the tunnel. Right. So I'm used to that, and I'm used to the maintenance of that. I oversaw the construction of it, so I'm very familiar with tunnels. So I can't speak on that.
So in other cities
but what I am seeing in a lot of cities is people building underpasses. So we're actually building bridges. We're putting the railroad on a bridge and we're lowering the street underneath the railroads so that we're accommodating the railroad and we're preventing the city from being separated into two sections.
So you're an advocate of underpasses then?
Yeah, but that's still a bridge, though. I mean, and I'm not an advocate of bridges. Okay, I don't want to come off as that. Like I said, I've designed tunnels. I inspect bridges. I inspect tunnels. I mean, I do all that. So
okay, now
I was only tasked with evaluating the bridge portion of this project. I was not tasked with giving an opinion as to whether or not I think a bridge is the right option or a tunnel is the right option. We came up with the idea of having 2 flanking spans because we were told about the historic district and whatnot and not impacting that. And we also realized that the original study wanted to move the existing Bascule Bridge over, which would actually put freight closer to those new high-rises that are being built along the river. And the closer you move a freight track to a building, the more vibration you're going to see. But if you're going to put commuter rail up in the air, that's lighter rail, less impact to the buildings. So, the original study, when you're making comments that you see in our report, that's based on the original study of shifting the existing FEC over, which they've said they're not
FECR.
FECR, I'm sorry, and putting the commuter rail on the opposite side. We came up with the idea that they said they didn't want their operations impacted or touched, so we would put one bridge on the east side, one bridge on the west side. Now we're almost within a right-of-way. If you look at some of the exhibits, I think, which tech memo was it, 1? I think it's in the appendix of tech memo 1. We show that literally we are bordering the right-of-way line on the west, or on the west side of the tracks. The only time we really go across the right-of-way line is on the river, and there's no historic district in the water. It's as soon as we get over the river, our tracks are moving in.
So you're talking about building 2 bridges now?
2 bridges, but they're only single track. Half the material, which means we're really not escalating cost. The only escalation in cost will be you're going to have twice the equipment to operate a bascule bridge and twice the substructure.
So these prices here are for
These are the original study. These are our evaluation of the original 2-track bridge study. It doesn't have the prices of our concept. Ours was a value-added concept that we said, hey, you know what? We weren't tasked with coming up with a new concept, but we saw the concerns that the city had with right-of-way and not impacting the historic district and said, you know what? We can do it different, and we can get railroad buy-in, because we asked the railroad if they would buy into flanking bridges, and they said, yes, they would. If you don't touch our bridge, we're happy.
So you're thinking of a bridge on either side of the existing
Correct.
freight line?
2 single-track bridges, though.
So, okay, interesting. So now that brings the rail bridge closer to the developments that are already there.
Well, no,
on either side.
it brings only
Either
the.
side.
I know,
But it only brings 1 track of commuter rail, whereas the original study brought 2 tracks of freight rail over. Freight rail, E80.
No, that was never going to happen because
but I'm just saying that
FECR
was
would
the
not
original
permit
study.
that.
That
Yeah,
was
I
the original
understand.
study.
Well, by the way, I do want to bring up Wade, because that's really important, though, Mayor, to understand is, just as Jeff was saying, our scope of work, which was approved by both the county and the city, were to look at the 4 alternatives that had been developed from 2020. So just as Jeff said...
Just basically to corroborate FDOT's study.
No, it's not to collaborate. It was to review. That was the whole purpose. Task 1 was to review it and look to see where there were cost savings. And more importantly, where could there be adjustments made that could be done?
None of which are contemplated in this study here.
We looked at cost savings, absolutely. I mean, everything from cut and cover to... Yeah, no, that was part of that study. Task 1 was to look at the 4 alternatives that had been developed under an interlocal agreement between Broward County and FDOT. FDOT has been assigned this technical work. They do the PD&E work, planning, design, and environmental. As part of that, then these were our 4 alternatives that we started with. We reviewed them, though, with the mind of, is there anything that we can do to save money on all of them? Again, we didn't look at this as bridge versus tunnel. They were all equal. There was no alternative that we spent any less time on. Now, we did divide up how we looked at it because we knew that tunnels were specialized, and we had Jacobs on the team, which is one of the largest underground tunneling groups in the country. Over 900 people. We also had people then that were not just local rail engineers, but we also had the Miami Tunnel engineer of record. We also had the national estimator that is working on a project in New York as we speak. These are people with real-world experience related to it. But what Jeff is saying is after we had the conversation with FECR and they said, hey, disrupting our operations isn't going to work, we knew we had a challenge with the bridge. So they came up with very quickly saying, value add, hey, there's a way that we could get past this. So it's not just a cost savings, but it's the ability to actually make the alternative workable.
Just as another point of information on that, no, I got to have that corrected. Is the freight line never moving? It's always going to be exactly the way it is. What's the rationale for that? Because I can't get to the bottom of it. No matter what we do, the freight line is staying exactly as it is now?
Correct, because they lose business. So what the problem is anything that disrupts their operation, and Wade can talk a little bit about his Florida experience with business mitigation, but it is a big deal for them. When we met with them, they said, do not impact our operations even for a day if possible.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
they are a sovereign.
There's nothing that we can do about that to even say if we build this bridge, they're not coming on anything that we do.
So they are a sovereign. So they are basically at the level of the feds, essentially. So that's why you have to have an easement anytime that you want to cross them. They're actually at the highest level.
I have...
Yeah.
You're the railroad process. Yeah, I'm coming over. So I wanted to just touch on a couple points, if I could, really quickly. One of the questions was the duration of the project, like 50 years versus 100 years versus 200 years and the sort. 2 considerations I want to bring to your mind. First is how you're going to pay for it and who's going to own that asset at the end of that time, right? So if you kind of think about it from a fiscal perspective, but equally important, if you're going for federal funding, you're going to look at something what's called a benefit cost analysis. And what that means is you're going to discount the future. How much is it? If I'm going to say I'm going to give you $1 5 years from now, how much are you willing to give me for that dollar now? Okay, you willing to give me 20 cents or a quarter for me to give you $1 5 years? So that concept applies in the future. By the time you're doing it at a 7% discount rate. That's required per regs and everything else for every federal large project program. That value by 50 years is zero for all practical purposes. It doesn't matter what the useful life of the asset is, because what's it going to be worth in 100 years? How much are you willing to pay for it 100 years from now? So that's an important concept that will come through in the federal evaluation, okay? And then I would kind of also link that back to how long before you capitalize it yourself. When do you want to pay it off? In 50 years, 30 years, the life of the surtax? What's your goal? So you have to kind of align all those things and then make sense of them. And that's, like I said, you're good luck. But be aware, though, that over time, those things, all of the value, cost and benefit, go to zero, and given enough time, measured in today's dollars.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let me continue. Okay, I was saying at the beginning, and again, these are my feelings. I think that there is a benefit to the city, a huge benefit to the city. I think it's a benefit to my constituents who live downtown. I think it's a huge benefit that don't live downtown but do work downtown. As a city, we have to look at the community as a whole, Broward County, Oakland Park, Pompano, Deerfield, and we have to look at the tri-county area. So it's not just us. We have to take a big picture of it. I did, Mr. City Attorney, I think at this evening's meeting, just to give you a heads up, I am going to probably, we discussed this earlier today, put forth a resolution as a summary of what comes out here. So the city will have something that you could go on. That was my plan this evening, that we will put forth a resolution on our take. Apparently it's not appropriate here, but look forward to it in the evening. Let's take a look. Come down. 572, 3 buildings. Forget those other two over there for a second. Look at the difference in price, and the question begs, how would we pay? I want that tunnel. I would love to have the tunnel, but the question is, how would we pay for that? I'll come back to that in a moment. We'll circle back. Let's go through a few other things. I've spoken to several stakeholders during the last several weeks, extensively. Todd, we've met 2.5 hours together. We've had several meetings since then. As Phil, I think Phil walked out for a second. Hopefully he'll be back. But
Phil's here.
There he is. We've met several times. The MPO, Greg and company, Greg and Brian, we've met several times. Spoke to Broward Workshop, and I spoke to Brightline. Now, I spoke to Brightline again several times. The last one was, I think, Thursday or Friday of this week. And let's make this simple. We talked about the options for the bridge. I said an 80-foot bridge, 55-foot bridge, a 25-foot bridge. As the mayor has pointed out, their one stipulation is not to interfere with their operation, period. That includes during construction, and that includes finished product. Do not interfere with their operation. They're willing to do some tweaks, but one of the things that I don't know, and Todd, we spoke about this. We keep speaking to FECI, which is Brightline, but I guess FECR actually owns the tracks. They own the land and own the rails themselves, and how much tweaking they have. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Some of the things that Brightline was telling me, and they could not be here. Take off the 80-foot bridge. Take it off. They're not going to agree to that. They told me this on Friday. I said, what about a 40-foot bridge? I go, nobody talked about a 40-foot bridge, but Phil with the marine industry, who I've spoken to several times, he indicated that 99% of the water traffic could go under a 40-foot bridge. So take off the 25-foot bridge, because that's going to hit right into their escalators, and they're not going to go with the 25-foot bridge. They're not going to go with an 80-foot bridge. They were okay with a 55-foot bridge. I spoke about a 40-foot bridge, and they got back to me like 2 days ago. That's a little too low. They need a little more clearance, so we're talking 45 to 50 foot. So let's just compare option 2 to option 4, because 1 and 3, Brightline won't allow it. We are subordinate to them, and if they say no, that's the end of that. Phil, can I borrow you for a moment? You don't mind, am I allowed to do this? We do this. Could bring him on up.
Which Phil are you talking about?
Phil from Department of Transportation, Phil Schwab. Is that this is like Judge Judy. Listen to all this clutter. I didn't know. Oh my God. Don't worry, Phil, it's not going to be any calculus, no math questions. These will be easy questions. Okay. These are things that we have spoken about at length. And Todd had mentioned that most of what he had done in his study is based off of your calculations. You're like the guru. You know everything about what's needed with tunnels as far as the state requirements. If you look at the cross section at the very bottom, we have to go, and correct me if I'm mistaken, 25 feet below the bed of the river, correct? Has to start at 25 feet below the bed of the river. And I think the numbers that we had come up with at grade level, the river's maybe 4 feet, so it starts at 55 feet below grade. Tunnel's about 25 feet, so the bottom is going to be about 80 feet, give or take. Is that about correct?
Yeah, again, Phil Schwab, in-house consultant at FDOT. As far as the depth of cover below the canal, I know in the feasibility study, I think they had 5 feet, and as they progressed the design, they realized that they needed more. They wanted to get the diameter of the tube as far as the separation between the bottom of the canal and so forth, and that forced the profile. I think somebody mentioned about the profile, so when you do the single bore tube, it gets very deep. And so from a constructability standpoint, they went with the twin bore, and they were using a 25-foot buffer between the top of that tunnel to the bottom of the canal.
And bottom would be, the bottom is 80 feet below grade, give or take. 25 plus 30 feet for the...
Well,
that's
25, and it's 50
I think
feet
that's
below
the number that we had come
channel,
up with.
and if the channel is 30 feet below grade, then it's 80 feet.
And we spoke about
the
grade going up on either side when you come from the bottom is roughly 2%, maybe 3% if you get away from it. Is somewhere in that range, correct?
Yeah, the length of the tunnel, you got to realize the alignment of the existing corridor curves.
No, I'm going to get to that in a minute.
Okay.
I'll get to that in a minute.
So I'm not sure I understood.
No, that's okay. We've worked together on a few items, and I love working with you, but thank you for being here. So if it was just straight, forget the curves, just straight, it's 2, maybe 3%.
3%.
Okay. I was very excited when the DDA came up with a plan to make it shorter. It didn't have to go as deep, and that's going to be a lot less expensive. But apparently, the numbers they came up with was a 5% grade, and that would be light rail. It would not be commuter rail. Is that what we had discussed, correct?
Yeah, those grades are closer to light rail.
You bring up another issue, and the problem is, well, let me start with Todd, if I could bring you back. I hope, no, Chuck, no. Okay, Todd.
Can I sit now, or?
Yes, you may. I might call you back, though. Todd, okay.
Yeah, it's musical chairs.
Okay. We spoke about a few things, and the question we came up with, and at one point you had alluded to it, and then we went back and forth. The Bright Line, FECR, owns the rail. They own the dirt, they own the metal. They're the ones who could say if we could go underneath them. And at one point, it was communicated to us that we could have a tunnel, but it can't be directly under their rail. When I spoke to Brightline, they said that is actually not true. We will let you go underneath the rail. Okay. And the question is, I don't think we've gotten the final word from FECR if they will let us go directly under the rail. Do we have an absolute answer that they say yes or no? Because that's a huge question.
Yeah, and that wasn't something that we, in our interview with them, that we asked specifically about that. And Nick, you may be able to add some clarity to this. But correct. So ultimately, the important part that you were mentioning is you have Brightline that's owned by Fortress, that's actually owned by SoFi, the South Korean bank. That is who owns the access rights. The physical asset is owned by FECR, which is owned by Grupo Mexico. So when you're really negotiating with one, you're negotiating with the other too. So it's a different lens.
But if Brightline says, okay, we could take it to the bank.
And, Lowell, actually, this is where we need to bring our funding expert up here. Lowell?
Oh, no, we'll get to that in a moment.
Well, okay.
Not off the hook so quick.
Yeah, we have I hope everybody is buckled in because there's a lot of questions that we still have to answer here that I'm still hearing. So go on.
Okay. Phil, I know I said sit down, but please, you have to come back again. Oh, geez. The length that we're talking about with the train, does that exclude, and Todd, you might be able to answer that better, does that include any offsets or curves underground, or that's assuming we go straight from one end to the other? Well, let me explain my question a little bit but in more detail. You're going to have a portal of entry and a portal of exit. And the question is, will the FECR say you cannot touch their tracks? or will they allow us to offset? And Brightline, when I spoke to them, I said it's something that might be talkable. But if they say no, we're going to have to offset, and that's a term I use, our portal in and our portal out, meaning we're going to have to go to the side to go down there so we don't interfere with their tracks. And what we had discussed is as you bore underground, you cannot bore to the right and left. You have to go vertical, and then you have to go horizontal to line it up and then go down and back again. So issue number one is if we have to go horizontal and then we have to go vertical and then is that going to increase the length of the total tunnel?
So a lot of the geometry and the lengths are going to be dependent on the existing alignment. And there's large curves to the north of the station. And so you're limited in what you can do vertically while you're doing a horizontal curve. And so that somewhat sets what you can do and where you can come up. And when you come up, there should be some assumptions that we can adjust the existing rail tracks left and right, but we have to keep their operations going. So it's a phasing type of setup, how that gets done. But you're going to have to create some separation to create the portals, and that's one of the biggest challenges regarding how you come up, how you enter the tunnel, and how you come up, because that creates a lot of impacts. And you also, to me, that's where you really get the division, right, is at those portals, and you try and space those so that you don't close down a major street, and you try and limit any street closure, because that's really where you're separating those communities, because they're connected by the crossroads now, because the freight line is basically going to remain. It may shift a little bit one way or the other, but it's staying at grade. So that was one of the goals when we were setting the length of the tunnel and trying to accommodate a station north of the bridge, or north of the crossing. And then also to the south, we wanted to make sure we had Tarpon River we had to deal with, and then we didn't want to impact Davie Road. So actually, the tunnel concept that we had developed closed 15th Street south of Davie Boulevard for the portal. We couldn't keep 15th Street open.
Let's talk on the north end. You touched upon this. Again, I'm not cross-examining you. You're our guest here. And I don't think I thank you for being here.
There's a lot of information, so I appreciate the commissioners.
One of the questions that Brightline, concerns they had, again, keep in mind they do not want.
Warren, I just want to ask you, because we have to get around the room. So if you could
last question,
a couple more questions.
Last one.
Yeah,
Brightline's very concerned about how you're going to put a platform under their station in the north, and that's going to have to be horizontal. Keep in mind you can't have a grade because your suitcases are going to slide to the back of the train. And they're concerned that we're going to have to excavate. You can't bore to put in that station and the platform. Is that true? Or maybe, Todd, you might be able to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, well, and you're reporting what they are concerned with,
right.
That they don't feel that that's a possibility, and there's nothing that we've thought that's come up to say that it's untrue. And I wouldn't want to use the word untrue. But what we know today, it seems like they know best related to that, and that they were probably correct.
I mean, how you slice it, that because it's horizontal, that will lengthen the tunnel length too, because you're not going upgrade, you're flat for that duration of the. Okay. Yeah. I think that's the last of my questions. I do want to go back. Somebody else could ask how we're going to fund this. That's the big question.
Commissioner Glassman, you're the other district commissioner. Well, he's the other.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Again, also, Mayor Rich, thank you so much, and to county administration and team. I'm really happy that we're here finally. Unlike my colleague to my left, I'm not going to ask a million questions because I'm not an engineer like he is. But I am going to just make a couple of comments and keep it kind of brief. So for months and months and months, we've been reading so much and listening to so many presentations. I did ask at our last city commission meeting for everything to be sent over to the county. Hopefully everyone received that. Because we did hear excellent presentations on November 21 from FDOT, Lochner, Mooney, BDO, Aikengump. We also have reports from White House, and we have reports from all of those groups that I just mentioned. We've really been studying this and really have been reading hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages for quite a while now. I actually wish that we had more of these meetings so that we could have been talking together to see where we need to go. Because we did have some really interesting new factual information at the November 21 meeting. I was interested in learning more about what the DDA was proposing in terms of Dr. Gary Brierly from Dr. Moll Incorporated. I thought that approach was kind of interesting and worth fleshing out a little bit more. I just want to say that I'm not so much concerned with so many of these very technical questions today, although we have all of these experts in the room, we have all of these experts not in the room, and I'm going to rely on that expertise. What I am concerned with today is where do we go from here? What are our deadlines to make decisions, and how do we walk down that path together? Because I really do believe that we do need to walk down that path together. I'm not so sure that we'll be able to take advantage of funding that we need if the federal government sees that we're not unified in our approach. I would remind everybody that years ago, if you look at the history of the Kinney Tunnel in Fort Lauderdale, same kind of debate, same kind of angst, same kind of controversy, very split vote. I think it went actually to the residents for a vote, pretty much 50-50, but the tunnel did prevail. Not the wishes of the parent of the Sun Sentinel at that time. What a surprise. But the Miami Herald folks actually did want that tunnel. So that was an interesting debate years and years and years ago. People should study that. Aren't we all happy that we have that tunnel now under Las Olas Boulevard? So what I would say is this is a generational project that we're facing. This is not a decision to be made lightly. This is a decision that's going to have incredible ramifications for generations to come, way past any of us in this room. And we have to really make sure that we're doing the right thing. Cost is so important. But again, at our November 21 meeting, I did hear some interesting approaches to funding, and I felt encouraged. I want to hear more of that discussion because I am convinced in my discussions with folks in my district and also others in the city of Fort Lauderdale that the overwhelming majority really wants to see us make a tunnel happen and do what it takes to make a tunnel happen. We have to get this right. We have to get this right because, again, this is going to impact us for many, many years to come. We have to have the foresight, we have to have the vision, and we have to make sure that we're doing what's going to be important going forward. So those are my concerns, and I want to see us be able to work. I believe that FDOT did tell us that we're looking at maybe a timeline of a February crunch date, if I remember, at our November 21 meeting. Bill, I think you said that February was our drop dead deadline on that. So those are my concerns. After we leave today, where do we go from here? How do we walk down this path together? And how do we make this happen so that all of the governments that we're going to be looking to and others for funding on this project see us as a unified voice and not just disagreeing amongst ourselves, because I really think that's going to impact exactly how we fund this project. So again, Mayor Rich, congratulations on your new role. County administration and team, county commissioners, thank you for having us here today.
Great. Commissioner Herbst, do you have any comments?
Thank you. Thank you, mayors. Appreciate all the information today. Thank you, Dr. Sturman, too, for a lot of those questions. They were certainly things that I had on my mind as well. I echo the mayor and Commissioner Sturman's feelings that a tunnel is the ideal solution in terms of the minimal amount of disruption on the city of Fort Lauderdale. But I am financially focused first. I'm a CPA, so shouldn't come as any surprise to anybody that frugality is my watchword. You look at the order of magnitude of the cost, and I struggle with the expense associated with constructing the tunnel and maintaining it over its lifetime. So I've spoken to many of the same folks in the community. I know there are people that are very concerned about the impact having it run through our downtown. I know there's been conversations about how we construct a bridge in such a way as to minimize the visual impact of it. I think that can be done. Before I moved to Fort Lauderdale, I lived in Jacksonville, which is a city with 7 bridges that cross the St. Johns River, and many of them are significantly taller than what's being contemplated here. The Hart Bridge, the Fuller Warren Bridge, the Dames Point Bridge. I mean, they're all over the city of Jacksonville. And I can tell you, having lived up there, that the suggestions of doom and gloom associated with bridges never came to the fruition of what's being suggested. So I'm not opposed to a bridge. I think it works. I think it moves the traffic. The most important thing to me is that this gets done. And I'm concerned that if we hold out for the tunnel and we don't have an identified source of funding, that this project is going to fall by the wayside. I've been following the commuter rail since it was first proposed. I went to a planning session on this up in Lake Worth well over a decade ago. And I've said this several times. There have been a number of projects here in South Florida that have stalled because of opposition. The Southwest 10 connection from the Sawgrass to I-95. What you saw with down in Miami, where they're supposed to run a rail line from downtown Miami to South Beach that was going over the MacArthur Causeway has been killed for 30 plus years. I don't want to look back 10 years from now and say that Fort Lauderdale killed commuter rail line. I think this is very important, not just for Fort Lauderdale, not just for Broward County, but for the entire Tri-County area. We have 1,000 people a day moving to Florida. Many of them want to come down to our area because it's one of the most desirable places in the state to live. The ability to move people around and get them off 95 is going to be critical over the next 50 years to the continued growth of our area. I do not want to wind up in a situation where everybody is on 95 and we keep adding more lanes to 95 and more lanes to 95. I grew up in a city that has robust public transportation. It's the only way that you could have density and not be gridlock and nightmare. So while I understand the implications of this, again, I look at this as what is practicable, what can get done. And the most important thing to me is done is better than perfect. So I will be in favor of the bridge option. Thank you.
Mayor, I just need to say one thing, because this is the second time I've heard this, and I didn't say anything the first time at our city commission meeting. I think it's false equivalency to compare the New River to the St. John rivers in Jacksonville. That river in Jacksonville is 100 times wider than the New River, and their downtown goes on for miles and miles and miles. Ours is much more compact, and the impacts on a bridge to our downtown would be much more acute than what Jacksonville would be dealing with. So it's not a good equivalency because of the size discrepancy of the downtown and the width of the river. Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Commissioner, for correcting me, but I really don't need that. My position is as stated.
Okay. Vice Mayor?
Good afternoon to our mayors that are seated here and everyone in the room. As far as my neighbors, my constituents who I've been having conversation with, the number one question that is brought to me and returned to me many times is who's going to pay for this? Where's the funding coming from? And with conversation we've had now and before regarding federal funding and timelines and things of that matter, I would say, because it has been said, we as a commissioner has not voted. We have not truly indicated where we overall stand regarding tunnel versus bridge. And with that question or the statement I want to make today is that I am standing with the option for a bridge because I believe it is more cost efficient, and also it will also provide opportunity to create economic opportunities, because this is a lot of money for a tunnel, and I believe that we could also look at those funds that could be allocated and used within District 3. So with the discussion going forward, I would like for us to talk about moving forward, because this has been going on for a time period, and the direction I would like to see is in the direction of a bridge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, do you want any members of your commission to? Okay, absolutely. Sure.
Okay, so I'd like to start with Commissioner Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor. I am fortunate to be a member of the South Florida Regional Transportation Authority, commonly known as the Tri-Rail Board, and have been so for 8 years. So I have worked on this issue, frontwards and backwards, with our District 4 secretary, who was also a board member of Tri-Rail, and with the staff and with the county, for years. And I'm somewhat familiar with the issue. I think everybody agrees that if we could get the funding for a tunnel, that we would go forward, and the county, along with the state, would pick up 50% of the capital cost. The federal government would pay 1/2 of the cost. But federal funding is an extremely competitive process. And we were talking about grants in the neighborhood of $100 billion. I think that was the average that was being awarded for rail projects. And it's a big deal to get $100 million. So if we're asking for the federal government to pay 1/2 of the capital cost for even the lowest bridge, you're talking about $150 million from the feds. And the second alternative, which initially was a 55-foot bridge, but I've heard this hybrid of a 38-foot or a 40-foot bridge, and I thought that there was close to some kind of consensus between or among the city, the county, and the marine industry on a bridge of that height, of like 38 or 40 feet, because it would allow much more than 90% of the marine traffic to get through. And, you also have these challenges that you've got a bridge at, Southeast 3rd Avenue, you've got an Andrews Avenue bridge, Southwest 7th Avenue bridge, you have the Freight Line bridge. So, you don't just, move the traffic just as a result of one bridge. You have to, synchronize all of those bridges. And what we can achieve is what we need to be looking for, because we have a window for funding. And as good as our appropriations folks are, our congressional delegation, and we have, several of them, from Miami-Dade County, from Broward, Palm Beach County, that are on full appropriations, that are on transportation appropriations, that can get things done. But, there's only so much you can do in this highly competitive process. So, one of my questions would be, I have seen studies on projected ridership, and I have been advised that the projected ridership that we have on commuter rail on the east side, on the FEC line, is about average projected, maybe even a little bit below average. And that, very much, controls the funding for the large federal grants, for intercity rail, for regional commuter rail. So you have somebody, Todd, you have somebody on your team that can speak to this issue about the projected ridership.
Yeah, I actually do. So, and I will introduce him because ultimately he was the Florida model man at one time who led the model task force related to that for some years. So, because ultimately one of the things that we did, and I'm going to give Wade the floor, because one of the things that we did for FTA is we actually reviewed their forecasts. So that is actually one of the expertise that Wade and myself come with. I was also on TRBs of the National Academy of Sciences modeling committee. So I was at a national level. I've actually written the current process that is done. I wrote the problem statement and was on the panel in which how you do determine travel demand forecasting, as well as Wade and I were the STOPS beta tester for FTA. So we can definitely speak to that with some knowledge. So, Wade?
Yeah, well, I'll try to keep this really short because I know your time's getting short. Ridership does matter, cost per rider. For capital investment grants, the large federal program you think of for large, multi-billion-dollar transit projects, the cost per rider is a very important metric. Be honest with you, commuter rail since the pandemic is not what it once was, meaning people aren't commuting to downtowns 5 days a week anymore. I'm sure you can probably look in this building and find lots of examples of that. And FTA requires that you use something called the STOPS model, which is a direct, basically a way of estimating that. So, you need to be very conscious, and I'll just leave it at that, of your ridership forecasts and recognize that post-pandemic they may not be quite what they were pre-pandemic. I'll just stop there.
So one of the big challenges, on Tri-Rail, the line does not run through downtown. It doesn't run through downtown, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, doesn't, run close to the airports. These are the regional hubs that are so important. These are our employment centers. These are our highest density areas, and that's what, draws the ridership. So we can expect much better ridership than we have on the Tri-Rail line. And even though we are improving our numbers on Tri-Rail, we'll never approach, what is possible, with a downtown line. And that is really, for the last 20 years, has been like the big incentive to move forward with commuter rail. So I know time is very limited. I'm going to defer. I know that our past mayor had some discussions with regard to a compromise bridge at 38 or 40 feet. And with the mayor's discretion, if we could have Commissioner Fisher perhaps speak to that issue. Well, that'll conclude my comments because I know others want to speak.
I just have a couple things that I want to go through. A lot of it's been covered, but I just want to add a couple things. So I went out and looked at the crosstown because everyone says everyone would prefer a tunnel no matter what, if all things. I'd still need to see a little bit more detail, all things being equal, even if the money genie came and dropped all the money. I'm not so positive what this would look like in this community digging a 3.5-mile tunnel after seeing some of the major tunnel problems throughout the country over the last decade or so, and what we would do down in South Florida with our resiliency, with our sea level rising, and what we see. But I understand that. All things being equal, if we could do it, that's something to talk about. But I'm not convinced there yet that even if all the funding was there, if this would be doable, just based on the geography. I went out with the mayor and looked at a tunnel. Obviously, this is not the Boring Company, but we went also to L.A. to look at the Crosstown Expressway Tunnel, which is commuter rail type for their subway. And it was a multi-decade project with, from what they were telling us, gazillions worth of problems once they started going underneath the ground, what they found under there. So we can all talk about it till you want to talk about disrupting a community. Wait till they start digging under it with what they find with the right of way under there. But that's a story for another day. I've seen a lot of these different letters that have come in, and I'm glad that all of our municipal mayors are here up and down the corridor and throughout the county and other elected officials, because I've spoken to them too. They want to see something go across this river. They want to see commuter rail come, and I'd like to see that as well. And this is the time that I think we're as close as we can to get there. And I remember I was on a panel with Greg Stewart a couple years ago when I was mayor, and he said, just keep this process moving. And now we have this southern area where we're doing it. We had a PD&E study the other night. I mean, we're really close to making this move and making this go forward. And there already is a bridge that crosses the New River. It's the bridge for the freight train. So we're not creating new major ground here. This is something that we can do and that we should do. So we're closer than the pipe dream that we were in the past. We're actually real close to north-south commuter rail, which isn't even the most important for me. I just think it's the logical first step. The most important for me is east-west. That can bring things down, but there's no way to do an east-west until you have a north-south to put them on when they get here to increase that ridership. But my question is, I see all these different letters of support from all these people from the tunnel. Some of them are different taxing agencies. Are they pledging some of their dollars for some of the costs of this? With those, I haven't seen any of those, so I'll just ask, who bears the risk of any cost overruns in these type of projects? So let's say the money comes in, we're building it, tunnel, bridge, spaceship, whatever it is. If there's a cost overrun, who bears the risk of that? The local partner?
The project sponsor.
So who that would be Broward County? So we would have an interlocal agreement with the city of Fort Lauderdale to reimburse us for any of these overages?
Commissioner Udine, may I remind you a couple of things?
Sure.
the 1% sales tax is generated throughout the entire county.
But this wasn't for this project.
Just once, let me finish.
Right.
30% of that tax is generated from guess where? The city of Fort Lauderdale.
Got it.
So to some extent, there should be some consideration that going forward, that some of that money, like maybe
Agreed.
even 10% of that money should be spent towards Fort Lauderdale's needs.
Okay,
and
so
that's what we're talking about.
Okay, so anything over that, then Fort Lauderdale would come and backstop. I'm just using that as a rhetorical because I do think that there would be more investigation that would need to be done, but that's all left out. Who pays for the operating and maintenance expenses along the life of the project?
That's part of the negotiation. So in our report, we did look using FRA's requirement to say what would be Brightline's commitment and then what would be the local commitment, but most likely that would be the project sponsor as well. But there would be a division in your negotiation with Brightline.
Okay. So I heard today that there's going to be a vote tonight by the city of Fort Lauderdale for some kind of resolution on something.
No, there's nothing scheduled. No, that was just a suggestion, but nothing's been scheduled.
Oh,
nothing's been scheduled.
Okay, so
because we still anticipate we've hired additional consultants who are going to report back to us.
Okay,
and those are and which they have been texting me.
That's fine. If there's no vote.
They've
been
texting me through this meeting saying that a certain number of these figures are considerably different than what they're coming up with. So we don't really have all of our information. So we're not going to. There's no way we're going to.
Understood.
Yeah.
I just heard that there was something.
That is not necessarily correct.
Okay. So if we have to delay this, what's the costs and what's the penalties what's the risk that we have as we delay? Does a project get blown out of the water?
No, but obviously everybody's aware of the inflationary effects that are happening. Every time you delay, it costs that much more.
Okay. So if there's a vote in Fort Lauderdale at some point, whenever it may be, either tonight or 6 months from now, if once Fort Lauderdale makes a vote with a majority of the vote, is that then the position of the city of Fort Lauderdale, or then are we going to still be back here? Does the goalpost ever stand in the same spot?
Well, Commissioner, so far the city of Fort Lauderdale has voted to support the tunnel alternative.
Okay.
That's what we are of record. Okay, and the city commission, this commission with the existing members, have agreed to pay for consultants that are currently undertaking an analysis to give us additional information about both the bridge and tunnel alternatives. So it would be completely premature to take a vote tonight when we've already engaged consultants to come back to us with additional information. Furthermore, the city received a $1 million grant, which you're probably aware of, which we received from the U.S. Department of Transportation to help facilitate our grant applying for tunnel funding, which the window opens, I believe, it's in February, and that's the target date. It's not the drop dead date, it's the opening date in which we can apply for funding from the federal government with regard to the river crossing. So that's kind of the timeline, and that's why I was surprised that the commissioner suggested we're going to vote on something tonight when we've already agreed to engage these particular consultants.
All right.
Okay, I mean, those are my questions. I don't think that there's. I thought we were going to try and get to some kind of resolution. Obviously, we're not going to because the county's.
You're not on. Listen, the city will have to determine for itself what it wants to do.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Those are my comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McKenzie.
I'll be brief. I thought this was a joint workshop to move the needle. So, having said that, I'm going to reserve my presentation or my abundance of comments to when the city makes its decision, whatever that is. But I've been on both sides of the fence at the city. I've seen the city. I was a part of the city stopping a rail system. I was a part of where this started with the city, along with the county, and how we get here. I sat on the MPO board, and I expressed my concerns and my position time and time again for a bridge. Just before exiting the city of Fort Lauderdale, I did say I would entertain the alternative of a tunnel, and that was going to be based on cost. And I haven't seen anything yet since the inception of this idea to cross the tunnel, across the river, where that cost is reasonable, sufficient to move forward with the tunnel. So I will still reclaim my position that a bridge is the best alternative here. And even going a step further at the county, I restated again, and I was talking to Bill Parcells the other day, and we had a conversation, and no, not Phil Parcells, the next best, which is the marine industry, who we've considered a lot of these alternatives around what can happen on that new river, and he asked that I would at least with the bridge consider 40 feet. And I think 40 feet consideration was probably over-illustrated in the alternatives up there. So I think moving forward, I think we should consider 40 feet or more to accommodate that traffic. And I think what my colleague expressed when you try to navigate these bridges and getting traffic back and forth, you got the 11th Avenue Swing Bridge that you didn't include in there. You got 7th Avenue Bridge. You have the Andrews Avenue Bridge. You got the 3rd Avenue Bridge, and bridges are there. Unless we fix all these bridges, we're still going to be having an issue with moving the marine industry up and down the waterways. But this will be a start. This will be a start. And the most offensive thing I've heard since the inception of this alternative is that bridges separate neighborhoods. Bridges don't separate neighborhoods. Bridges are actually connectors. Bridges don't separate neighborhoods. People do. Economics do. Not bridges. So I wish we would take that statement out of the conversation as we move forward. I would love to entertain all facts that are put on the table, but that is a false statement. I've seen in other places, and Todd and those have illustrated that there's other cities with bridges that have great parks and great connectors and great activities going on underneath these bridges. So that statement is so offensive. And people pull me over time and time again who have decided to shift from a bridge to a tunnel to say that this is why they want to do this. That's offensive, because I sat at the city and I've seen people from the east side take and take and take from the west side. But to come to me and say a bridge will separate communities, no, people do and economics do. Let's move forward with a bridge when the city of Fort Lauderdale take official vote. Then we'll come back and do a real joint workshop, Mayor, and I'm not taking away from your leadership. Otherwise, we're wasting a lot of time.
Thank you. Commissioner Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and to everyone here. Like the presentation, but I'm going to start where my colleagues stopped because I had to take a walk outside the room to get further clarification as to when you're talking about what divides the community. I wasn't sure what we were trying to say here. And I've lived on the west side of the railroad tracks since I've been in Florida. And yes, it is indeed offensive when we hear about divides. What are we thinking? And as was stated, people create divide, not railroad tracks or tunnels. I have one question as it relates to sea level rise. I did not hear that mentioned in any of the comments made to convince me as to which one would be impacted more. Would it be the tunnel or the tracks? Which one would be impacted more? To our marine industry, yes, Mr. Mayor, I understand when you fight for your city and your district, you know what impacts your area most, what's the major economy, the job creators, all of those things come into the decision that we will make. But there comes a time when we have to look at what is best for the region, what is best for the Tri-County area as our people live and work in different spaces and places. So I look to that when I'm going to be making my decision. So marine industry, we understand, and if it takes a bridge that goes a little bit higher, I can understand that also, because bottom line here is moving traffic, right? We're trying to get people moving and not gridlock on our roadways, already overused. So that is where I stand on this discussion. Learn a lot more, and I think we need to make a decision, county, separate from the city of Fort Lauderdale. And I would like to hear that. Doesn't have to happen here. We don't have to take account here, but it's time for us to put it on the agenda for us to move, to do whatever it is, meaning moving forward either way. Let's do that. So thank you, Madam Mayor and colleagues.
Thank you.
And thank you, Fort Lauderdale, for being here. Most of you I've met for the first time. It's good to meet you. Thank you.
Senator Geller.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First, I have been agreeing with the position that all things being equal, I prefer the tunnel, but as is frequently the case when my colleague Commissioner Udian speaks, I hadn't really taken into account the actual construction of the tunnel, which certainly could be problematic. Having said that, I have a question for administration, either Mr. Kelleher or Ms. Zapiro. It is my recollection that we actually did vote, we, the county commission, for a 40-foot or so bridge at a prior meeting. Do I recall correctly?
There was no official vote. It was during a workshop.
But was that not the consensus?
It appeared to be the consensus. I didn't correct every one of the 9.
And we were told at the time that that would deal with, I believe, 95% of the traffic, and that had been vetted with MIASF. Is that correct?
That there had been conversations, and our understanding was that the marine industries, and they're here to confirm clearly, but that a 40-foot bridge would be feasible and acceptable to them.
Thank you.
Can you ask Mr. Purcell to come to the
Their letter
podium?
actually said that.
I thought they refuted that at our meeting.
Yeah, he changed.
They're in your packet today.
Well, he's here. Why don't we just ask him to speak?
Because I'm not asking him to speak right now.
Senator Geller,
yes.
the letter that is included in your packet is from the marine industries, and it is.
What is the date on that letter?
It's today. I think yesterday's or today.
It was actually as a follow-up to a meeting that was held on October 16th of this year. And there was, it's in the backup that we provided you
I just
today.
wanted to confirm what I've been heard at Mayor Trent.
It said the takeaway is a 40, to quote the letter, the takeaway is a 40-foot bridge's feasibility in engineering to cross the new river and land at the existing Brightline station. Sorry, that was a question. Sorry, hold on, let me find the right.
That was a question.
Hold on, let me find the right spot, because I was just pulling it out. It was concluded that an ideal bridge height would be 40 foot and necessitate no more than several openings per day. It's in the second to last paragraph of the first.
Thank you.
Do me a favor. I hate to interrupt. I mean, you keep saying 40 feet. It's going to be 45 to 50. Please, somebody check with Brightline to confirm. I think 40 feet is not on the table with Brightline, so it's going to be like 45 to 50.
Excuse me, but this is not the topic for today. We're going to finish up here and get everyone to speak so that we can eventually conclude the meeting. Senator Geller.
Question. On the costs that we have seen, do these include acquisition of right-of-way? And it is my understanding that we would need probably to acquire right-of-way regardless of whether it's a tunnel or a bridge. I'm just asking, do these numbers include what you believe will be the appropriate right-of-way acquisition for both tunnel and bridge?
Correct, because these numbers do include yes.
Okay. Yeah. I have a, let's see, I'll get back to that. The $3.3 billion, which does seem a lot in the tunnel, but is that's not calling for the replacement of the entire tunnel. That's calling for the replacement of components, as you mentioned, the air handlers, the smoke, fire suppression, et cetera. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I just wanted to make sure you
Yep,
were
cyclical
not
capital. Yep,
replacing
and
the
O&M.
entire tunnel.
Correct.
Okay. Next, huge issue for me. What impact, if you can explain either or for both, tunnel, bridge, we're talking about this being so great for north-south. I am concerned about every time that I drive, not every time, but I live out west, and most times I drive in, I get stopped by trains or bridges. So my question is, can you discuss what impact either tunnel or bridge, both preferably, would have on east-west traffic? Would it block traffic at Broward? Would it block traffic at all of the, how many of the major roadways would traffic be blocked because of additional trains?
So as we mentioned before, so the freight tracks would not be going anywhere. So you would still have that conflict that exists there. The tunnel would remove those conflicts for passenger rail. And I don't believe, bridge, Jeff? What's
bridge was down to, with the 42, or the 40-foot action that was mentioned, I was at that,
right,
on the meeting. I believe it was one road.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought I projected well enough.
Sorry.
No, not when you're being taped.
Webcast.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. The 40-foot option would only close one street, I believe, but don't hold me to it. I think it's 7th or 9th or something down south, because I saw the new alignment.
When I'm talking about in terms of east-west, will a bridge or a tunnel, would one result in 15 additional having to stop traffic per day, while the other would be none? I'm just trying to figure out.
No, it's like, that's what I was saying. Just only like, and then don't hold me to which, it's either 7th or 9th or one of those streets was the only one that it would prevent. Everything else, the bridge is going to be up, so it's actually going to have less blockage of traffic going east-west, because then the only traffic, like Broward, will only be impacted by freight. Broward will no longer, and Broward is,
Good.
I mean,
I know. I stop there all the
right.
time.
And
now.
the 40-foot bridge proposed,
Which is why I keep wanting to move the government center to Plantation.
correct, and the 40-foot proposed will also
Next.
allow for 23-foot vertical clearance at Broward in case somebody wants to put in some type of east-west streetcar or whatnot.
Gotcha.
So there'll be plenty of vertical clearance for east-west.
Thank you. How do you stop a tunnel from filling with water when it rains?
Oh, that's a Nick question. Yep, Nick?
That's a great.
I'm sure there's an answer. I just want to know that there is one.
That's a great answer. But most of the time, be honest with you, the tunnel design, this groundwater taken out is from the firefighting. Okay, so actually the drainage system, you have a so-called trench drain before the tunnel in the portal. So all the water try to get into the tunnel, intercept at the portal.
So the answer, I don't need details. The answer is you can design it so that
Absolutely.
even in our hurricane monsoon rain, it won't fill with water, correct?
Correct. And
Okay.
you'll be designing for.
That was all right. Next, I'm very close to the end here now. My questions are, one last question before I get to my ultimate one. Kevin, on page 5 here, 4 of 10, I'm sorry, it says FEC says no, FEC says no, FEC says no, FEC says probably no. And 4 of 10 in the final report. And so my question is, Todd or County, I believe that you said that basically it could grow wings or something and fly away, but that there are sidings or wings, or can you explain to me how we get around no, 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 no?
Yeah, so to get around the no, 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 essentially, and that's an important concept. FEC, as reported, said we do not want to be impacted in any way. Our operation is too important. When we looked at all 4 of the alternatives, there was no option to not impact it. But Quandel, our consultant that managed the bridges, came up with an idea to say, hey, we think that we could do one-way rail lines next to each other to not disrupt the FEC line. And so they're actually working on that now. It's a project that's sponsored by the Broward MPO. We've actually already developed the profile and the plan related to that, and we're finding that we can actually make that work without impacting.
And you're telling me that the FEC would be probably okay with that once you show it's engineeringly possible?
It's possible. I mean, you never know what they're going to say. Again, as a sovereign, it's up to them. They own the right of way.
And go up. And is that within the same budget that we're talking about now?
Yes. We did ask if they would accept flanking bridges to eliminate the impact to their operations, and they said yes, they would consider it. I mean, until you put a plan in front of somebody's face, the best you can get is they'll consider it.
So, because originally all I saw was no, which means that we're wasting our time here. But you're saying that there is an alternative that might work. Okay, my last question / comment then is, I don't want us to miss the window. What I am concerned about, somebody, and I apologize, I've heard 82 experts talk about what the maximum grants are that are we're likely to get from federal government. Whoever said that, was that you?
Yeah, I was giving you some statistics about the programs.
Okay.
Yes.
My question is on the cheapest of it. I'm assuming that a 40-foot bridge is likely going to cost in the $550 million, $500 million, something like that, based on those numbers. If we need 50% federal, that's $250, which is probably already more than you're talking. If the bridge is anywhere close to that number, and I am infuriated that this long afterwards we still can't agree on numbers, but it is what it is. I'm unhappy that there are still conflicting numbers. I would prefer to have everybody in agreement on numbers. But since we don't, I'm going to have to go with something close to this. It sounds to me like we're pushing our luck at trying to get $250 million. If we're going asking, even if it's only half that, $3 billion, even if it's only $1.5 billion, that's $750 million. We'd be asking Congress for $375. I mean, it sounds to me like, based on what you're saying, and I came in not knowing these numbers, that you believe our chance of getting federal funding for the $3 billion or the 50% or $2 billion or whatever that number is vanishingly slim, while we have a substantially better chance of getting funded at a 40-foot bridge. Can you comment on that? And I am not going to respond. I am done, but I want to hear your comment before we're finished.
All right, excellent. And I think the best place to start, because the thing that I want to mention to both mayors and the commissioners, these are your numbers. This was actually a collaborative effort. These are the city of Fort Lauderdale's numbers as much as they are Broward County's numbers. This was a joint study. These numbers stand as part of your lexicon as well. And they are in range with what we were seeing with FDOT and even the Lochner report that we were so graciously given by Fort Lauderdale staff that simply said, looking at the numbers, we see them to be somewhat low. They would recommend a 10 to 15, but we actually developed cost estimates based off of industry standard, class 4 standards. And these are your numbers. They're one number that you have. You have multiple numbers available to you. Now, as it relates to paying for it, and I'll bring Lola up as part of this as well.
The question was on getting federal funds.
Yes. And so what I like to focus in, again, is on the facts. So what we know is the mega projects, last year there were 9 of them that were selected, there were 16 highly ranked of 200 plus applications. 126 of them was considered ineligible. Of the 16 recommended highly eligible or highly recommended, only 9 of them received funding. The highest was Amtrak at $292.2 million. The lowest was $30 million. The average award was $130 million for those 9 projects. For RISE that just came out, RISE the cap is $25 million. For infra, I believe it was the highest award was about $180 million. So those are just facts. That's information for you to consider because ultimately this is to inform your decision making. So again, even if you totaled all of those up and got all of them, you're looking at about $500,000 on very competitive grants, not to talk about the eligibility issues. And go ahead, Wade, please.
This is Wade White again. I just want to highlight that this by itself is not a project. Okay, when you talk about applying for a federal grant, a bridge to nowhere is not a project. This project is going to go from whatever the terminus of the BCR South is, the medical center, I know, but all the way to the northern terminus, wherever it comes out of the study. That is a project. Asking for one piece of a project that doesn't have independent utility, your probability went way down, and I'll just say that.
Okay, thank you, Senator Geller.
I'd like to actually finish this up, though, because we do have our funding expert. Oh, Lowell said no.
Okay.
Go ahead,
Mayor.
Mayor.
Let me just have Commissioner Fisher close this out before I make my close.
Thank you, Mayor, so much, and thank you for the City of Fort Lauderdale. And I've been privileged to work with the City of Fort Lauderdale over the past year, having multiple meetings together with Mayor Trentalis and the MPO and with the White House group, and trying to come up with a resolution satisfactory to both parties. I just have to ask a couple of questions because I want to put on the record, because I'm a little bit confused. I want to make sure on the White House group that this is occurring. Are there any alternatives viable as a standalone project from a federalist perspective?
Actually, Lowell, I'd like you to answer that one.
As Wade indicated, you have to have a project that has independent utility. So the question is, what is this project? Okay, is it just a bridge? Is it just a tunnel? What is it connecting to from a transportation perspective? So to apply for federal grants, that's going to be one of their questions. What is the purpose and need of the project? Okay, so if you can't answer that question, you don't get past start. So that's really where you're going to start at. And when you go through this, if you match it up with extension of commuter rail, then you do have a project, and you can consider that 50% funding option from that perspective. Okay. At these numbers, you're looking, remember, you have a overall transit program in your county. Miami-Dade has a big program right next to you. These are highly competitive. So you're going to have to make policy decisions about where you're going to spend the money, and consider yourself having to come up with anywhere from 25 to 50% of that funding.
Okay. To our county attorney, just on a legal perspective, who specifically has a legal authority to construct any project in the FEC right-of-way?
Commissioner, it's the FEC right-of-way is controlled by FECR with access rights to Brightline. So negotiations would have to occur with both of those entities.
And that's what I thought. Okay. And also the legal authority to operate and maintain, because we talked about O&M, a new community rail service in Broward County. Who has that legal authority?
Well, again, it would have to come down to negotiations with Brightline and FECR.
Okay. Mr. Stewart, are you here still? Greg Stewart from MPO? Because I think it was brought up, and Mayor Trentalis mentioned about the current grant that they actually had submitted. I think that was independently. That was not with MPO and with the county, correct?
No, neither entity actually signed other than the city of Fort Lauderdale, although we were mentioned throughout the whole document.
So I know Fort Lauderdale obviously has expressed their interest and intention to perform additional studies and submit an application in February for the mega grant to the U.S. Department of Transportation to secure the capital funding to construct a tunnel. And Mayor Trentalis has been working industrially with U.S. Department of Transportation. But can Fort Lauderdale do such? Can they apply for that grant if the commuter rail project sponsor is actually Broward County? And that's kind of been the miscommunication here. I want to make sure who's in charge of what, or who can do and what can't do.
And for the record, Greg Stewart, Broward Metropolitan Planning Organization. The answer to that question is quite simple. No. The city of Fort Lauderdale can apply for something for itself. The county can apply for something itself. However, if they were going to, and this is where I've gotten very confused by the grant that was applied for by the city, that actually referenced back both the MPO and the county. So therefore, that grant itself, I'm not exactly sure how the city would be able to administer anything for a Broward County project.
Okay. Again, I want everything to be clear on who can do what and how we do it together if need be. And do you believe it's realistic for either Fort Lauderdale or Broward County to request grant funding to build a tunnel early next year? Is that realistic?
All right, so that's a quick and easy answer. No, it is completely unrealistic.
Okay. So what I'm getting at is that we have worked so diligently this past year to come up with that resolution, and Mayor Chantalis and I, like I said, both of our teams, along with the MPO, have been, and we came up, we thought was a possible plan, and it was to do first a 20-foot bridge with obviously some cut and covers, because we have to deal with traffic going east and west. It's most importantly to get Broward Boulevard, Davie, Sunrise moving so they're not constantly having to stop for a train, which I thought was a great compromise, and we agreed to that, but understanding when we went to the Marine Industries Association, there was issue with the 20-foot, that it was not accommodated, although we had heard that it was 90% be accommodated, et cetera. But they come up and they said, listen, we need a 40-foot, minimum of 40-foot. And so we came back to that. So I'm looking at Phil. Phil, does your letter still stand? And can you still stand up and let me know, are you okay with a 40-foot plus bridge? No.
He's got to come up.
Come up to the podium, because I want to, and Mayor Chantalis wanted this earlier, I want to make sure, too, that all the stakeholders here are involved, and the Marine Industries is very, very much involved in this. Yeah. Because I had personal conversations with Phil.
This shows you how collaborative we are.
So, Phil, you and I have had conversation after conversation, and most recently, the 40-foot was acceptable to the Marine Industry.
Yeah, what happened at the City Commission meeting, there was a gentleman that got up that spoke on behalf of what his interpretation of was a conversation he had with someone with our industry. That a 40-foot bridge, look, there's the 55-foot bridges, which are I-95 and Tri-Rail. That accommodates our industry. We know that. They're fixed. A 40-foot bridge will accommodate the majority of our industry. So there won't be more than several openings a day. So several could be 3 to 7 if you look at what several means. And that's about it. And that's for boats that exceed the standard, which that standard is a 34.5 feet air draft. So that accommodates a 40, a little bit bigger, actually. So it's not like, hey, let's go down to 34.5 feet. Let's do a little bit more so it gets that 125, 130. The 50-meter boats, they're going to have to open. But keep in mind, there's 4 vehicular bridges and 2 railroad bridges as it is on the New River. The vehicular bridges open 30 times a day. We'll reduce that drastically. Okay. And I don't mean half. I mean drastically, only to several openings a day.
All right.
Because, again, the 40-foot bridge will work.
So thank you for putting that on record, because everybody has a communication staff. So
everybody gets an opinion. And, again, there's a lot of numbers that everyone throws around this room. I've heard no different than this study. You know, this study showed that a small bridge accommodates 90% of our industry. It didn't come from anyone in our industry. It came from, and again, we've had a monitor on that bridge for the last 7-8 years. We've 24/7 got a video. We know every size that goes through there. We know how much it opens. We know when the train's broke. We know everything. So, and we've worked very closely with the train to find a solution. We've always been at the table, so we're not at the menu.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. All right. And I also... That's Coach Parcells. We're going to call him Coach for now on, just to keep it. Yeah, I think I'm okay with you, Mr. Stewart. And also, you know, there's so many stakeholders involved here, and people mention, hey, I'm for this, I'm for that. And I know the Alliance, Mr. Swindell is here. Last time we spoke, the Alliance has not taken a position on this matter, correct? Can you come up to the podium and just let that be a record? Because, again, I'm not trying to be cross-examining, but I just want to make sure that the facts are presented.
No, Mayor Fisher, thank you for asking that question. I double-checked with my team during this meeting to make sure that a letter had not been produced. We have not taken a position on the tunnel.
And I do know that the Mr. Lindblad for the Chamber of Commerce of Florida, they had taken a position back, I think, in 2021. But again, speaking with him within the last 30 to 40 days, they had backed off of taking a position at all. Matter of fact, the chairman, Jack Seiler, was insistent on their board. So I want our stakeholders to get engaged. I want them to be part of us, and we want to hold hands together. But at the same time, I want everybody to understand really where we need to be at the end of the day. And the DDA, I think left, but the DDA folks, and I think Warren Sturman, you mentioned about that. Dr. Gary, and I can't remember his last name, Dr. Gary Breyer from the... Dr. Mole? I don't know, but anyway. His
nickname was Dr. Mole.
Dr. Mole. What was interesting when I had a conversation with him, and Kevin, you on the phone with me, and he had done 1,500 tunnels, etc. But two things stood out to me. His very first words out of his mouth, he goes, "To build a tunnel in Fort Lauderdale is about as difficult as it gets." I'm thinking, good goodness, I wouldn't have my experts say that right away to start the conversation. But more importantly, than his focus was on really the hole only and not building the entire tunnel. He said you could do a shorter one, but he stopped and said, "Listen, I'm only talking about the hole itself." Right, Kevin?
Yeah, he said both those things, but he also added one other thing, that he would not recommend a single bore hole because it would collapse upon itself because of the ground conditions.
Correct. And again, I appreciate the DDA getting involved and trying to get expert. I appreciate the workshop, and the workshop was very clear with me. My last meeting with Steve Hudson and with Russ Clinette said, listen, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We're going to support what does work, because as Phil and I have always had the philosophy, no is not the solution. We're going to cross this river. We're going to get there sooner or later, because I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I represent District 4, including Fort Lauderdale and Oakland Park and Pompano Beach, and I used to represent Deerfield, so I still kind of claim them at the end of the day, which has 3 stops. But so I have to make this, obviously, as we can see by the all correspondence that we've had, and Mayor Cooper, thank you for yours as well, you see this is truly a regional plan. It's not a specific plan for a specific area. And those letters were very helpful to me at the end of the day, so thank you for all those agencies that jumped out, and obviously Miami-Dade and Palm Beach. I never want to hold Palm Beach County hostage. I would never want to do that. And if we've got to get over this, and I'll tell you what we promised, this board promised and committed that we would serve our cities north of this river, and I hope and pray that we will continue to have that. Otherwise, I'll be hung, from the neck. And we talk about commitment. We talk about Oakland Park right now. We talk about affordable housing. We talked about that today. Oakland Park is putting where the money where it makes sense. They are right now building right where their station is going to be affordable housing, their new city hall, and retail. They're doing it. Pompano Beach is planning right now for parking, etc. And Deerfield Beach is doing the same thing. So it's imperative that we get there, and we get there as soon as we can. So the overall advantage that we talked about and the obstacles has been multiple consultants. We've heard from multiple consultants, but this is the ones, obviously, that we both paid for, and I understand that. But at the end of the day, and my frustration, and Mayor Trentalis knows this as well, I've continually heard for the last year, we can do it cheaper, we can build it, and I'm all for the tunnel if we can do it and it makes sense. But it's not making realistic sense at this point with all the experts involved. But I've heard that Fortress will make a commitment, that the cost will, I have looked for this for a year for the things in writing. And that's when the most frustrating things I get about is, that's fine. I'm all for the tunnel. Give me the company. Tell me how much it's actually going to cost us so we can go forward. I never get it. I never get it from the folks that I meet with. I never get it from the folks that continue to ask for it. And it becomes frustrating on my end because I want to get there so bad. But ladies and gentlemen, time is now. And you heard the word time is of the essence. In the real estate industry, that is very important. Time is of the essence now. Time is now. Time has come. We can no longer afford to wait. We have to make a decision. We have to move this thing forward. Otherwise, 2024, November comes, we have no idea if we're going to get any federal money at all, much less 100 or 200 million, whatever we can hopefully get. So let's be realistic. Let's be regional. And let's make the right decision for Broward County, for Miami-Dade, for Palm Beach, for this entire region, for all municipalities in Broward County. We want to move folks north and south. We want to move them east and west. We can no longer delay. We can no longer delay. And I hear February and so forth. February is a grant, which I just talked about, which we can't even do because we're not a party to that. At the end of the story, let's do this together. But at the end of the day, my understanding is it is a Broward County project. Obviously, we want our partners to get engaged and be involved, but at the end of the day, it is Broward County. We have to make the right decision, this board does, to our constituents and to the entire region that makes it most sensible, most cost-efficient, most fiscal responsible to make this a reality, because it's got to happen, folks. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to thank our former mayor, because he has been passionate about this, to say the least.
Yeah.
And I think the only time I ever saw him upset was at a commission meeting where we were discussing this. And I will tell you, it shows in the fact that cities all up and down the coast who are within Commissioner Fisher's district and not even within them have sent us letters really saying pretty much what what our people have been saying here today. Time is of the essence. We have got to move. And many of them said, made the choice of saying bridge. And I have to say, Commissioner Herbst, I just met you for the first time today, and but I have such agreement with you on what you said, and I'm not a CPA, but it's to me about the cost, the magnitude of the cost that I see when I look at what's on this screen, and I think about all the needs in our communities, and I think about all the folks up and down the highway that are in different cities that are already building or about to be building. We have affordable housing going up. Hollywood is doing that. Pompano is going to be doing that. It's all up and down this transit-oriented opportunity. So we just need to. I know we talk about you have another study. But I have to tell you today, one of the reasons why we had this study, why we did it the way we did today, is because this is the only study that we have done together, that we both agreed upon the people, White House, we agreed upon the scope of service, and, we thought that we could all come to consensus. They gave us facts, just as was being said a little earlier. And by the facts, we need to look at the cost effectiveness, the time. When I look at the time, 10.5 years with the tunnel, and I have to tell you, my one of my daughters lives in L.A. That thing's been going on there, it's unbelievable. And everywhere you look, I didn't even ask. I mean, Boston and other places where you have these tunnels, and they find all kinds of things once they get started. And I am also I'm also extremely concerned about climate resilience, and I think this is a big issue for a tunnel as well. So between the cost effectiveness, the time, the fact that we have joined together, and we have an incredible in-depth study in front of us that really gives us the information we need to move forward. I just want to say one last thing. We do have a consensus among our city commission, our county commission. When we met, it was 9-0. Everyone wanted to move ahead with the bridge, and I feel that at this point, I'm hoping that you all can get to that. I heard 3 people here today say that they would support a bridge. So
well,
I don't know.
Let's not direct us.
No, I'm not directing you.
Okay.
I'm just saying I heard 3 people say that. Okay.
For the record,
it's now up to you. We know where we are, and you have to determine, what you're going to do with this. But we need to move ahead. It is our project, and we need to move ahead with this. We can't hold it up any longer.
Madam Mayor.
Wait. Let me respond. First of all, I know we're concluding today's workshop, and I appreciate everyone participating here today. And I appreciate everyone's patience in the back room, because I know it's been a little tiresome to hear all the different conversations and things that have been said. But I don't want anyone to leave this room thinking that the city of Fort Lauderdale does not want to participate in commuter rail service. The city of Fort Lauderdale has repeatedly expressed its opinion that commuter rail is important. But at the same time, we have to consider what the impact is on how it gets through the city of Fort Lauderdale. I mean, all these other cities you mentioned, Oakland Park, Deerfield, and all building projects, that's great for them. But if it's going to negatively impact our city, then we have to consider how can we best navigate this project through the city of Fort Lauderdale so that it does not negatively impact our economic development, our flourishing downtown, all of the things that we're trying to create in an urban environment that we've spent decades trying to pull together, and we're now finally seeing the success of those efforts. For those who are concerned about funding, it was announced today that Brightline just received a $3 billion grant from the federal government for their project out in California. So projects of that magnitude are being funded. We're not talking about 50 million or 100 million. We're talking about billions. So it is within it is contemplated by the U.S. Department of Transportation that these size projects can be funded at those levels. Also, I appreciate the work that the White House group has done, but keep in mind, even Todd had indicated that they weren't asked to come up with design plans for the best alternative. They were given 4 alternatives, and they were asked to determine the feasibility of those 4 alternatives. Keep in mind that when FDOT first proposed these 4 alternatives, the cost for the tunnel was $3.8 to $4.2 billion. And then somehow, when they sharpened their pencil, they realized that they could come up with a figure that was half that. In fact, in their community outreach, their public outreach meetings in which I attended, they were down to $1.8 billion to $2.2 billion. So these numbers have a way of just of fluctuating in so many different ways, and so for that reason, because the scope of employment, that scope of engagement that we had together asked the MPO to come up with, we felt that we, the city of Fort Lauderdale, needed to really ask consultants who have built tunnels to come to us and say, look, what would you do under these circumstances? Could it be accomplished under these circumstances to be able to create a pathway over the New River or under the New River, and bring us cost estimates, timelines, operation and maintenance, and all of that. The city of Fort Lauderdale, in its last meeting, voted to engage consultants, BDO and others, who are not here today to present, because that wasn't the purpose of today's meeting, but who have been engaged by the city of Fort Lauderdale to come back to us, who will now come back to us, and I'll be very happy to present those figures to you as you consider going forward. But the point is that putting a bridge through the middle of the city of Fort Lauderdale, expecting people to live under a bridge, recreate under a bridge, I thought we're past that in this day and age. Cities took down bridges. If you look at old pictures of Manhattan, when they had elevated rail systems going down 2nd Avenue and 5th Avenue, those have all been eliminated for good reason, because not only are they blighted, but they also bring a neighborhood down. So the point is that we have to talk not just about capital costs, but social costs and environmental impact. And to me, you can't put a dollar figure on some of those things. You can't put a dollar figure on social costs. You can't put a dollar figure on economic development impact, when in fact economic development is already happening. So as we leave today, I know that we're going to have differences of opinion. I thought we had come to a nice agreement with the 25-foot bridge, Lamar. When Monica sat us down and proposed that with the underpasses for the major arteries of Sunrise and Broward, I thought it was a win-win, because even with a bridge, we're still not considering what's going to happen at Sunrise or Davie. Because if you talk about adding 60 to 80 more trains at Sunrise Boulevard, I'm sorry, Senator Geller, but you're going to have to suffer through the bridge, those guard gates coming down at those intersections, because we have not, even a bridge makes no accommodation for those vehicular pathways. So, this is a very holistic study. We really haven't, addressed those areas of concern that are very important to the city of Fort Lauderdale. So, going forward, I'm hoping we can continue this discussion. I know there are certain deadlines, but something tells me that if we really put our heads together and work in good faith together, we're going to be able to come up with a solution that's going to be able to be satisfactory for the community. So thank you. Did you want to say anything else?
Oh, yes. Commissioner Udine, you had asked a question. I had said something earlier, and the answer was blatantly erroneous. I'm going to re-say what I said, Mr. City Attorney, Mr. City Manager. Once again, I'm going to repeat myself. I do intend to bring a resolution forward at tonight's meeting regarding this, just to put you on record. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Guess we're done.
Thank you all, audience, for being so
Thank you.
patient and
Thank you.
listening.
Wrap up?
And yeah, meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.